All right, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Christians, or perhaps soon to be called Tag Team Apologetics, for this show with me, Tim, and Aaron, the Presup Ninja.
Yeah.
When we do a little
Presup. Right. This is also on my channel.
Yeah.
Find out.
Check that out. Open it up.
I am
on your side.
I'm gonna bump over and see if.
So we are obviously not professionals, just having two guys, two Christians. We are apologists and evangelists, and we like to engage other worldviews with the truth for Christ. And so that takes the form of, street evangelism and apologetics, as well as debate and engagement, as well, and critique. Critique and criticism. That's what I was trying to say. Critique and criticism, and a little healthy jest. I think you're going to see tonight.
Live on my YouTube channel, Presup Ninja.
Nice.
So yeah.
Oh, there it is. I got the notification.
That's pretty cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, so we've done. It's been about a month since we've done this, just because of schedules and calendars, and man, there is just such a hungry. Yeah, we get to travel. Both of us traveling different places, and there's just such a hunger going on in the past couple of months for apologetics within the church, within the Big C, the Universal Church. Yesterday, we had our young adults at church. They wanted to know more about apologetics. Like, I'm careful to say that there's like a revival going on, because I think some people are so quick to throw it out and be like, "Oh, that's a revival." But it seems like with Gen Z and that younger adult generation, there's a lot of people who maybe have left the church for a time and they're really starting to come back. And so that's kind of what's going, like, at our church, really struggled for a long time to get like a college/young adult group together off the ground. It would just never, like, it would start and then kind of like sputter out. But then about a year and a half ago, they formed a new class, and man, it's just like exploded. And it's gotten huge, and they're asking a lot of questions about apologetic related questions, like, if I'm going to take this seriously, if I'm going to commit my life to Christ, if I'm going to live like a Christian and make church a big part of my life, like, I want to know, like, I need to know answers to some of these big questions. And so their small group leaders reached out to me, and they were like, "Hey, can we do an apologetics intensive for a few hours on a Saturday?" And we did that yesterday, and it was awesome. It was a ton of fun. Chick-fil-A donated the food for lunch, which was super cool. And cool. So that's going on in my community. And then you see the stuff with like Wes Huff and Joe Rogan, and the attitude towards Christianity specifically is shifting in pop culture.
I think so too.
And it's like the bottom is falling out on atheism. Like, I really, I think it's been around enough now for people to really understand the atheistic worldview better. And these younger generations aren't buying what naturalism is selling. They're realizing more and more that atheism and naturalism just comes up short in being able to explain the world around us.
I agree. I think the pendulum swings, right? And the pendulum probably swung really far in one direction with the new atheist movement that died because it offered nothing in replacement.
Yeah.
And I think the new social media, internet scientist, internet. What do you call himself? Internet educator or a science educator. I think this won't last either because again, it doesn't offer anything.
Mm.
Um, but I think here's what I think is interesting, and if you don't mind, just real quick,
Yeah, for sure, man.
just tell my own story real quick. Um, it was probably like 10 years ago that I started listening to a certain person, and to James White, and he was really impactful in helping me ultimately submit to the sovereignty of God and realizing what that meant, right? God's freedom to choose to do as he wants. And what was so convincing was how consistent he was able to be with tough biblical passages. He
Mm.
didn't have to hem haul around, right? So I'd kind of been an Arminian, and you're always sort of apologizing for God and trying to get him off the hook for who he is instead of loving and worshiping him for who he is and giving God or allowing God to have the freedom in your mind. Obviously, he doesn't need you to allow him, but in your mind,
Mm.
the freedom to do what he wills. And so that led me to become a Calvinist now and to adopt Reformed theology. But I remember thinking, like, if this is true, like he's so consistent with the way he defends the Bible. If the Bible really is true, then science should support the Bible.
Mm.
That was my first thought. And so, but I had this thing. I was like, but it has to be. I got to hear it from a secular scientist. Like, I want to know that the Genesis flood is possible, but from a secular scientist. Which I'll give you one guess. How many I found? Zero. Right. And then, so I was like, okay, fine. I'll listen to what the Christians have to say. So that's when I discovered Christian scientists like Jason Lisle and Andrew Snelling and Nathaniel Jensen and all these, you know, Harvard PhD, like well-respected, credentialed men in their field doing research, doing work. Stephen Myers was one of them, William Dembski, um, Douglas Axe, Michael Behe, right? All these people. And I started now, not all of them are creationists. But
Right.
I just started hearing people appeal to the exact same evidence, but from a different worldview, right? He's looking at the exact same evidence and they were interpreting it different. And when I made the distinction between data and conclusions, when that light went off and I was like, oh, so there's all this data in the world. And then there's the way people understand the data. And the way you understand the data is based on your worldview, right? And then it was like, oh, okay, so it's not actually a function of creationism has no real evidence. I look around and I see everything is evidence for creationism, like literally everything, right? So what's the difference? The difference is our worldview. And so then the more I learned and the more I pushed and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that much of what we believe about especially the past, evolution, and I'm going to use the umbrella term of evolution to talk about the Big Bang, even if Forrest won't like this, the Big Bang
Yep.
through biology, because it really is the entire secular narrative is a story of evolution, of things changing over time, going from simple to complex, whether it's the universe or a single-celled organism. Um, so anyways, once I was like, oh, okay, so it's really a matter of how you view the data. So then I did the same thing with philosophy. I was like, well, if now that I see science does support the Bible, if the Bible's true, then so should philosophy. That's how I discovered presuppositional apologetics. That's where I was like, oh my gosh, like the problem with philosophy, I'm sorry, not the problem. A struggle that philosophy has, secular philosophy has, is that they don't have God at the center of their worldview. And that's why they struggle to find like a coherent foundation for knowledge, and presuppositionalism solve that. So anyway, my point is this, is that, and I think this is what young people are starting to realize, is that the Bible is true. It's rational. It's the only rational worldview. Science
Mm.
without the Bible is irrational, and philosophy without the Bible is irrational, and science without philosophy is irrational. And all of these things are interconnected, and you can definitely be smart and a Cambridge PhD philosophy of science, you graduate, right? and a Christian and defend your worldview coherently. And once I realized that, now I don't worry about it. I don't worry about it at all, right? And I think
Yeah.
I want to share that with other Christians. Does that make sense? That was sort of a long rant, but
No, that was perfect, man. That's going to be an awesome short for sure.
there you
We'll
go.
be we'll be clipping that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
It's same.
anyway,
I
so
mean,
that's what I want to share with people.
yeah, and my journey into apologetics was similar too. I growing up in the church, I never had anybody present any kind of an apologetic case before me. I never saw anybody defending the historicity of the resurrection or how we
Well,
could
that's
be
a good one.
confident that John actually wrote John. Like none of that stuff, and it just wasn't talked about very much.
Mhm.
Uh, and then the first time I actually saw somebody starting to do that, dude, my world changed, and it became real to me in a way that it had not been before.
I agree.
You
I
know,
got that from
and
James White. Hmm.
yeah, man. And so I don't think apologetics saves anyone.
Hmm.
I think it's first, and I talk to people about this too. Apologetics is first for discipleship. It's about building up. Building up Christians. It's about building up our own faith. It's putting tools in our tool belt to go out and engage the world around us. And then so this then it's apologetics is for believers first, and then
Hmm.
it's for non-believers second.
Yep.
And
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 for the non-believer, it's, hey man, take that same skeptical eye that you apply to religion and turn it on yourself. Turn it
mm,
on your worldview. Ask if your worldview can give you what you're looking for, right? If it
yeah,
even has just the simple foundations for knowledge. Can you even know anything if your worldview is true, right? Obviously, you can know things. I would argue that's because your worldview is not true. But Mr. Unbeliever, just turn that critical eye on yourself. And if you just find anomaly after anomaly and problem after problem and contradiction after contradiction, like don't become a pragmatist and just suppress that. Like engage it. Why is your worldview like this? You don't have to live that way. There is another way that gives you peace internally that you can understand the world and peace with God, right? You don't have to live the way you're living.
yeah, man. And I know we got to get to the video because
Yeah.
it's a long piece of content. But one thing I do want to share is that um, Aaron and I actually met up recently with an atheist who saw our show. And we had a great conversation. But one thing there's some things that stood out in that conversation that I want to bring up here because it's been a big learning experience for me, and I'm trying to improve about how I interact with people like
Mm-hmm.
this, and I want
Mm-hmm.
other people to do too. Um, Aaron, super skilled in Presup, hence his name, Presup Ninja. I like Presup
Thank
too,
you.
but I also like talking about historical evidences. And so there was a point in that conversation where we pivoted a little bit to talk about the
Yeah.
historical evidence. And all we did was just lay out data points as objectively as possible and asked him, hey, what is your conclusion here with this historical data? And just what was really fascinating was that he would not even try to provide an answer. Like,
Mm-mm.
is it a myth theory? Is the resurrection a myth that developed later? Was it a hallucination? Like, what best explains the historical evidence we had? And this guy, and I hope we get to talk to him some more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but just straight would not even try to come up with his own answer. He was not interested in explaining it. And I think what we saw in a lot of that discussion was his pre-commitment to his own worldview.
Yeah, and I think it was never more clear. And I'm not making fun because he was a super nice guy. I actually
For
really
sure.
enjoyed
Yeah.
talking to him. I'm not making fun, but I thought the moment when I really understood how deep his presuppositions were and how they wouldn't allow him to even engage was when you asked about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Like, if Jesus resurrected from the dead, like if the evidence pointed that, what would you think? And he said, well, first you'd have to prove that supernatural
Oh yeah, yeah.
things can happen. And you were like, isn't resurrection from the dead proof of supernatural things? And it was like just that wall that was there, you know? And it's like, I was like, man, when you said that, I didn't catch it. You said that, and I was like, oh, you're right. Like the commitments
Yeah.
are real, and
Mhm.
we're gonna see them from Forrest tonight.
All right. Before we hop into that, you want to take this question, Aaron?
Neither. um, my my belief in God is, well, I mean, first and foremost, my belief in God is based on the transformative work that Jesus has done in my life. I know when I got saved, and I know that I am saved, and I know that I know that God is real, and I know that that's like a personal
Mm-hmm.
testimony. I know that doesn't mean anything to anybody else besides me. You want to know why I know God is real? It's because I know when I got saved, and I know what that God saved me. That's all I can say about that. I don't really want to say much more.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean,
But
but I
now,
would say bouncing off into his second point, his second comment here that kind of goes together. There is tons, and I'll be careful. I don't like to use the word proof. Can be a gotcha word sometimes. There is evidence. Number one, in the presuppositions that we use in everyday interactions in the dialogue, and that what we're just using to engage with this comment. God's existence is necessary to even begin to examine evidence, and on the evidential side, like what Aaron mentioned, dude, it's everywhere. It's it's obvious that God exists. And Christians might be like, "Oh, is it? But is it really though? Because like divine hiddenness and like I don't know.
Remy,
People tell me that there's no evidence all the time, and like, no, we've let people condition us to believe that there's no evidence. There's a ton of evidence. You can't wake up in the morning without seeing evidence for God.
yeah,
You
it's
can't
everywhere.
wake up in the morning not just like an abstract existence of a God, but for understanding who he is as an intelligent creator and his
Yeah,
omnipotence. It's everywhere.
power.
Even Richard Dawkins, talking about like the collapse of new atheists, says things about biology. He said that biology is the study of things that have the appearance of being designed.
Right. And
Like
let
he concedes that when you look at the human body, the default is that it's designed.
mm-hmm.
He's like, you look at it and it appears that it's been designed, but it really wasn't. But no. You
Right.
look at that, the human body is designed.
Yeah. And real quick, I just want to say, as far as the question about evidence and proof, here's the thing, man. God is the necessary foundation on which
Mm,
all evidence, knowledge, or proofs are built. So there is evidence that supports the truth of God, but there's no evidence that proves God. First of all, that's impossible because that would just be circular reasoning. If God is the foundation that gives evidence meaning, you can't then say that evidence proves God. That's circular, right? So, no, in the sense that you're asking, where I show you a piece of data, therefore God, no, because that therefore, the word therefore, only has meaning because God exists. We don't say evidence, therefore God. We say God, therefore evidence has meaning. So
mhm.
not in the way you're asking, but yes, given that God is the foundation of all knowledge, everywhere you look, everything is evidence for God, right? Greg Bonson called it the toothpaste proof for God. Just using toothpaste in the morning assumes the truth of God, of the triune God of the Bible.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And if you've never heard that before, that might sound crazy, and we don't have time to unpack all that tonight. But stick with us. You know, send us an email. By the way, comments are already cooking. You can send us an email too at conversationswithchristians@gmail.com. If you've got a topic or something you want to see Aaron that I dive into in a little bit more detail.
Mm-hmm.
But this comment says atheism became focused on being anti-Christ, but they rarely talk about Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism. So it is anti-Christ more so than arguing there is no need for any God. I do agree with that. Part of it though, an atheist would say, well, that's because Christianity is the predominant religion that they combat against, and had they, if they were atheists in India, probably going to be more concerned with in Hinduism than Christianity. But generally, I do agree. Let's look at this one. I know we got to get to our video too. Not so much everything is explained through science. Everything that Christians have pointed that was unknown. Wait, not so much everything is explained through science. Everything that Christians have pointed that was unknown and said that's God was explained away.
Oh, you're saying science explained away God? That's
Wah ha ha ha
preposterous.
ha.
That's
Dude, I need a
preposterous.
soundboard, dude.
I know.
I need a
Yeah,
soundboard like to work some
yeah.
sound effects and some of these things.
Because you understand how something functions in the world, which is what science tells you. I'm assuming you're talking about science because you understand how something functions. has no bearing on whether or not God exists. You being able to tell me the steps that something goes through as it functions in the world has nothing to do with whether God exists or whether there's a creator. That's completely irrelevant. Like the two things, it just doesn't prove anything about a creator. It'd be like
That's
saying
right.
I understand how cars work, so my car wasn't built by anybody. Like
W-
it's just unrelated.
Dude, what we get often is that people will say, like, there have been some religions that did not understand a thunderstorm, so they prescribed deities to the thunderstorm, like Thor and his hammer and things like that. But that has never been the claim of Christianity. That
No,
has never been what Christianity has done or has been, as an attempt to explain something that
explain it
is
with a natural
unknown.
world.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
it's never been the case. Um, all right, last comment before we dive into our the meat, because I think this is might be a good segue.
Hey, do you not believe? Do you not agree with me because you know my presuppositions are true?
All right. Do
Uh,
you not believe in evolution? Because that's a good, solid explanation for why we are here. Or is it? Or is it,
yeah,
Mr. American
I would
M?
disagree with that. I would disagree. I would say that the more we learn about life, the more unlikely evolution is true. I think evolution fails scientifically. And now look, wait, let me back up. When you say evolution, that's a broad term. When I say evolution is not true, what I mean is the neo-Darwinian tree of life, common ancestry. We all came from one organism, and that was the beginning, and we're all related like that. Obviously, evolution happens every day. I have two dogs; they're different breeds. That is evidence of organisms changing over time. Okay. However, that neo-Darwinian common ancestry tree of life is a story that is not well supported, that has lots of problems. The more we learn, the more problems there are. This is while they won't abandon the theory, the problems are well understood. The anomalies are there. I'm going to appeal to Thomas Kuhn and say evolution is the paradigm right now, and there's just not enough anomalies to overturn it, but they're building up. They're building up. And so, what I would say is if your worldview is secular and atheistic, evolution fits the data. Um, if you're a Christian, design fits the data, a common designer, a creator. Here's how I say it evolution is an unnecessary layer. I don't need it. It's an unnecessary layer. God created the world, He told me how He did it. It's evident all around us. The things that evolutionists point to prove common ancestry also prove common designer. It's two competing hypotheses drawing the same conclusion. Um, so I would say no. I think evolution is not true because there's too many problems. It's philosophically untenable, and obviously it leaves God out of the picture. Theistic evolution has its own problems, which is just relegated to the philosophical theological part.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's what I would say.
All right, Aaron, do you want to introduce our clip that we're going to be critiquing tonight?
Yeah, I saw this video come up on YouTube, and it's Forrest Valkai, and he's giving us I don't know, it's a lecture speech. I don't know what you would call it. I don't even know where it's at, but the title is "How to Teach Evolution to a Creationist." And I watched it, and in typical Forrest Valkai fashion, it's ridiculous. It's more about theatrics and gish gashing than it is actually addressing arguments. And plus, I personally think, me and Tim talked about this before, I want to be charitable. Tim's way more charitable than I am. And I say this not to insult somebody, but I truly believe that the Aaron Ross and the Forrest Valkais of the world are bad for relationship between Christians and atheists. There are thoughtful atheists. It's just not them. And I wish that they didn't have
Mm.
such an influence, you know? Um, and so, and it's not personal against Forrest Valkai or Aaron Raw. It's the way they go about doing things. There's evolution. I see atheists giving or creating videos about evolution all the time on the internet that I don't find to be mocking and condescending, right? And it's good information. And I wish that people flocked to that more than they did to people like this. And the same thing goes with in Presup. It's the Darth Dawkins and the Jay Dyers type that just are abrasive and rude and bullying. And like, that doesn't help anybody, right? All that does is make people headbutt each other. So anyway, that's my personal problem with it. And so that's why I'm not as charitable about it. I wish that he was less influential. I wish he was less influential.
But but I totally agree. So Forrest Valkai is one of the more prominent members of the Atheist Experience and The Line and that brand of show. And it's portrayed as a live dialogue, live debate show, but that is not what you're going to get. The atheists on that show, like Forrest Valkai, they are, when they're talking to somebody on the phone, they're not talking to that person on the phone. They're talking to their atheist audience. Like, they're saying things in a way that makes that audience go, "Oh yeah, that's right. That's right." It's not about constructive dialogue at all.
And that's what this video is.
And so we would say that this speech, this lecture that he's giving, by the way, it's from a place called the Center for Inquiry, which is a secular humanist organization that hosts speeches and things like that. But you ready to jump in, Aaron?
Real quick, will you put American M's last comment up there? I just want to say quickly, luckily, it only seems that way to you, and that's not the way that it actually is. It's extremely consistent.
For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go ahead and start.
All right, here we go.
Oh, there. I guess it was at the Center for Inquiry.
Hello. Thank you. What a lovely introduction. I do not deserve that.
Can you turn the volume up a little bit?
Know me. My name's Forrest. I'm a biologist and a science communicator. I've studied biology for admittedly way too long. 4 undergrad degrees and 2 grad degrees, all so that I can teach at the prestigious university on the internet. Most of my content involves teaching science in a cool, fun, exciting, direct, engaging way to try to get younger audiences more interested in learning biology. For example, here's a clip of me using the popular TikTok style of...
I just want to say, he starts his talk off by so much clout, man. He looks by like...
You saw it too. He was like, "Thank you for that introduction that I don't deserve. Hi, I have 4 degrees,
5 degrees,
and I'm on the internet, and here's my TikTok and my doo-doo-doo." Yeah, I was like, apparently they didn't do a good enough introduction.
Yeah, they didn't. Right? He's like, they left some things out. We need to get in here, and and so when this shot comes up here that we're looking at right now, my brain first goes, "Oh, did I mess something up? Like, why is this on the screen?" And then I remember, oh, he's showing everyone his 1.4 million followers on TikTok.
Oh yeah.
Like that's what he's showing. He's not just saying, like, "Oh, I'm on TikTok. You can find me here." He's showing you how many followers. He's showing you just degrees and his followers and his
Okay, so it wasn't just me. I thought I was being super critical. I thought I was being
dude. It's I don't know.
Of recording myself in a mirror in order to teach a little lesson about evolution.
Do you know that sheep are more closely related to dolphins than they are to humans? This is because the artiodactyls, the even-toed ungulates, share a more recent common ancestor with cetaceans, dolphins, whales, and porpoises, than they do with primates. In fact, they're even in the same taxonomic order called Set Artiodactyla, because it contains both the cetaceans and the artiodactyls. And by the way, having an even number of toes is what sets the artiodactyls apart from the perissodactyls, which have an odd number of toes. And the perissodactyls split from the artiodactyls way before the cetaceans did, which means this little lamb is more closely related to a blue whale than a horse. How awesome is that?
Sometimes, when you want to teach kids...
By the way, I'll do my best not to stop it every like 30 seconds. But
Yeah, I know, right?
you're gonna
It's like it's tempting.
one of the themes I think you're gonna see here is I'm curious on your thoughts on this, Andrew, Aaron. I think he talks in a way that a lot of his audience probably struggles to keep up with, and I think he probably does it in order to sound like more sciencey, like more knowledgeable. Because what he's talking about with like those different things and why the sheep is more closely related to the blue whale or whatever. Most people that hear that are probably not familiar with those terms.
No,
And
exactly. Like that's why we were talking. I said he's not a science educator; he's a science regurgitator, right? Like he hears things and he repeats them, but he's not contributing anything. And if you're an educator, when I first heard that, I was like, "What in the world was that?" It was just like a string of Latin, right? And just in a quick explanation afterwards. But all he really said was because of there's a theory, right? Now we got to keep in mind this is based on morphology, which has its own problems, but you have even-toed animals and you have odd-toed animals, and they hypothesize based on a theoretical model. We don't actually have like fossil evidence of this organism, that there's a 5-toed ancestor, and that the number of toes was reduced and it split 3 this way and 2 this way, and because of the different toes, that's how they categorize them. That's what he said. Like basically there's a categorization system based on the number of toes they have, and they assume that it came from a single 5-toed animal, and whales came from the 2-toed side, not the 3-toed side. So if you're going backwards, it would be like sheep, whales, 5-toed animal, horses, whatever horses, 5-toed animals, right? So that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
I don't know if I said
it. Oh, thank you. But sometimes when you want to teach biology, you just got to call up a friend and borrow a sheep for a minute. It's what happens. People love videos like this for a lot of reasons. They're fun facts. They're a little bit surprising. They contain ridiculous animals, and in this case, a sheep as well. But on the internet, controversy and debate and argumentation sells a whole lot better than any straightforward science lesson. And that's why my most popular content by far is when I respond to creationism. And of course, when I say my most popular content, we're not talking about that one time when I made a video about the neuroscience of foot fetishes and got like 15 million views and a bunch of articles written about it. We're not talking about that. No, my most popular and rarely foot-related content is called Reacteria.
Clickbait-teria.
In Reacteria, I take a video which claims to be able to debunk evolution, watch it with the audience, and explain why it's wrong, using that video, that pseudoscience, to teach real lessons in biology, how evolution really is and how it works and the arguments that we have about it. Like, for example, this video from a group called Genesis Apologetics, where we have these two kids named John and...
He sets the stage that there's no serious engagement here when he talks about pseudoscience, real lessons in biology. He's already excluding any evidence or argument that might be made by calling it pseudoscience. And I'm sorry, but these guys are not pseudoscientists. Now, he's not going to actually bring up he's going to bring up Michael Behe and Stephen Meyer briefly. But most of what he does is not engaging with the actual scientific arguments. People doing work in the field and trying to push these ideas forward through research, he's not engaging with that. And the idea that the idea that people with PhDs from Cambridge are pseudoscientists is absolutely mind-boggling.
And charlatans, he calls them.
Yeah. Like that they can't give you real lessons in biology. That Douglas Axe isn't a molecular biologist. That he can't give you a real lesson in biology is, like I said, he's setting the stage. So he can't lose this game because he's set the rules in his favor.
And I want to highlight this comment too. American Demon says, evolution is not done voluntarily. It's done when necessary change is needed. That's actually not accurate in terms of what neo-Darwinian evolution is. Evolution is random mutations. It's random mutations, and and allegedly sometimes they're beneficial.
Right. It's
And so
random mutations. So that's the thing. And actually, we're going to talk about this. It's random mutation and then selective pressure. But at the heart, it's random mutation because you can't select for the mutation that isn't there yet.
Right.
Right. So, but anyway, go ahead.
And Jane as they try to discredit common evolutionary themes and arguments.
Is it just me, or is it impossible to line up animals in the way they evolved?
Then this one right there, this guy there, this one right next to that, just like that. That looks pretty good. Okay.
Nailed it.
Yes, Forrest.
This is exactly what Forrest just did.
You're brilliant. Now look, this is the evolution of cars. You can see that it started off aquatic with 2 wheels in the back, and then it developed wheels in the front, and then because it didn't need them, it dropped the 2 wheels in the back. Now the first one is purely in the water. The second one and the third one are amphibious. By the fourth one, we're not even in the water anymore. We're completely on land. And you can see by the fifth one, we've developed a top to protect
a soft shell roof. Yeah.
Yes. And then by the last one, well, we've gotten rid of the trunk because it's more beneficial to have the bed for the truck. I mean,
dude, you almost made me spew my water. As soon as you started explaining the links between you sounded exactly like them. Exactly like them.
Right? Like, okay. And I know that we're being mocking. But that is morphology. Morphology is looking at these similar traits and then trying to build these trees off of these traits. Okay. And here's the real problem. And this is not like I'm not making this up. Obviously, this is a well-known problem. Is that what we're finding is that when you line up creatures according to their traits, morphology according to their traits in a tree, and then you do the same thing with like their genetics, with their genes, the trees don't match. Which is why, now he didn't tell you this is why whales were reclassified, right, to be now where they are in the tree, because they were originally just considered aquatic creatures and they were under this one tree, morphology tree, right, just built on their traits. And then when they started looking at genes, they were like, oh man, this is actually wrong, they should be over here. And that's where they started to be connected to land mammals and thought to be evolved from land mammals. So if morphology was really a good way of doing it, if it was a really an accurate way, wouldn't you expect that genetics, like your genetic tree, would line up with your shared trait tree as you do that? And it's not just whales, it's very common actually. And it's a problem in evolution. It's a problem with morphology. It's a problem with when you look at a phenotype tree and a genotype tree, right? And they don't match. It's not like a rarity. It's like a thing that's happening, right? And that's because it's subjective. It's completely subjective. Those skulls that he put on the thing, it's completely subjective. Not completely. I shouldn't say it's completely subjective. It's very, very subjective. Just like I did here. It's very subjective with how you view it. If you don't come to the table with presuppositions of common ancestry, you're not actually going to necessarily draw that conclusion, right? I would actually make the argument that creation accounts for that data better. The fact that you have shared traits and you have shared traits and diversity of genes, right, actually makes more sense in the creation model. If we really did come from a common ancestor, then and genes code for traits the way that in the tree, like they talk about, then these trees should mirror each other, right? But they don't. And I think that's good evidence against using these types of methodologies.
Yeah. I want to call this out here. Yeah, we don't think so, American. And actually,
Yeah.
with some recent discoveries, people are questioning even the 4.5 billion years old. I mean, they're looking at. We were talking about this before, Aaron. I think it was the Hubble.
Yeah.
They were using to look at light in distant galaxies, and they're starting to question even that the universe actually might even be twice as old as we originally thought it was. So secular scientists really have no idea. I mean, they have a ballpark, but it can be off by like a few billion years.
Yeah.
That's a lot. But no,
Yeah,
it's not.
it's because it's based on certain presuppositions. Like, make no mistake, the ability to measure the age of a rock, and I use that term loosely, the ability to establish geologic ages with radioactive dating comes after the idea that the Earth is old, right? It was already believed, it was already the consensus that the Earth was old, millions of years, maybe a billion years, we didn't really know, before we started trying to measure it. That's one problem with evolution, especially when you're talking about lining up skulls in order of in their evolutionary order, is that it's just a self-referencing system. Charles Darwin saw animals changing over time and developed his theory of evolution. And by the time we were actually, right, because he complained about the fossil record being very incomplete. But by the time we were 150 years later making the fossil record complete, we already believed in evolution. So everything that was seen in light of common ancestry. It was the only game in town, right? Yep. So yeah, if I get 5 skulls of different size and different features, no one's saying that organisms don't adapt, a change over time. I mean, we can watch it happen. But that's a far cry from everything originating from a single organism and all these different body plans and genetic information and just the diversity of life and the complexity of it and just the sheer mathematical improbability of it. And not to mention, just like there's so many problems. Anyways.
Yeah, and I want to highlight this point too from Remy. Creationist scientists, like we talked about at the beginning, credentialed scientists, guys, not just dudes sitting in their basement stacking up undergrad degrees so they can teach on the internet. Credentialed scientists have made predictions that have been accurate and true. Remy mentions the rings of Saturn. We've also studied magnetic fields around other planets, such as Venus, and the rate in which they deteriorate. We've got creationist scientists, his name escapes me right now, but he made a prediction at the rate that the magnetic field around these planets were deteriorating. And his prediction actually came true, which sheds a very different age on those planets outside of the 4.5 billion years that we generally, or that secularists would generally assume about our universe.
Yeah, for every anomaly, there's a rescuing device. Comets don't last billions of years. Earth's magnetic field, the amount of sediment that's deposited in the ocean.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things.
Let's get back to our buddy Forrest.
Yeah, we can talk about that forever.
I've been making this series on and off for about...
By the way, that is the kind of content that is the most popular that Forrest does. Yeah. If you look at the video, you can see the little humps at the bottom, like where it's most popular. That kind of thing, like that simple little proposition, is what sells the most. And he's even conceding that point.
Yeah, it doesn't engage creationist arguments and it doesn't add to the conversation. And that's
about 3 years.
Yep.
Now, I just released episode 27 last month where we reviewed Night at the Creation Museum with Eric Hovind and Answers in Genesis. And over this time, I've reviewed and responded to a lot of creationist arguments, counter-arguments, complaints, and misconceptions. And I've discovered there are several themes that come up again and again and again and again.
So if we're taking that view of Darwinism, we can ask, how could something like this, something like a mousetrap, be put together one tiny step at a time?
There are transitions within kinds, but not from one kind to another kind. A cat doesn't evolve into a dog or vice versa.
Both humans and squid have a lens that projects an image onto a retina. That means that a very similar eye had to evolve twice.
No way! And so amazing. It seems impossible that it could have evolved in the first place. But now they believe it happened twice?
Yep, that would be impossible. Times 2.
The discovery of information at the foundation of life in even the simplest living cells provides strong grounds for inferring that a designing intelligence played a role in the origin of life.
We didn't like evolve from anything. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, how can like an African American person evolve from a white person? We're different skin.
All right, pause it right there. Aaron M., you're begging the question when you ask about proto-humans and Neanderthals were humans. Okay, so this is the problem with Forrest. This is why I don't like his style. He connects Michael Behe and Hank Hanegraaff, right? That's who that was, Hank Hanegraaff, the guy in the middle.
Oh yeah, Bible Answer Man. Yeah, Hank Hanegraaff.
Yeah, Hank Hanegraaff, who's not a scientist, so I'm not
Right.
defending Hank Hanegraaff's scientific pedigree, but he connects Michael Behe and Stephen Myers with the guy at the end who's on there right now, who clearly has problems, right? He's clearly has some sort of racism problem, and he clearly has
but actually, I have heard Forrest. So this guy says, like, how did black people evolve from white people? No, Forrest believes that white people are more evolved than black people. He says that white skin is an evolution that is post darker skin. Now, I'm not saying Forrest is racist, but I've actually heard Forrest say on things like the atheist experience is not far off from what this dude is asking.
Okay,
it's not far off.
So you're saying the guy's he clearly is lacking some education, but his question isn't necessarily dumb.
No,
right? It's posed in a way that makes you laugh. But here's the thing. He's connecting those two things. Michael Behe has a PhD in biochemistry. He worked at the National Institute for Health. He worked on delineating design and natural selection in protein structures. He's a professor. He's written 40 technical papers, 2 books, one of which was called one of the most influential books of the 20th century. That's Darwin's Black Box. Stephen Myers has a double major in physics and earth science, a master's of philosophy, and a doctor of philosophy from Cambridge.
A philosophy of science. Yeah.
Yes. He did his dissertation on methodological interpretation of origin of life. He's written 3 books. Dude, to connect those 2 men to this guy that's on the screen right now is on a level of, I don't even know if dishonesty is the right word, but it's a shame is probably the most charitable way I can say it, that a person would make those connections, right? I mean, do you get what I'm saying?
No, yeah, that's the goal, is to lump these serious guys in with some hokier content and kind of bury it and murky it all up together.
Yeah.
So that Forrest's audience come away with thinking that all of the other credentialed guys are as serious as this last clip that we're looking. Like, there's a reason that Forrest put this clip last.
Yeah.
And it's because he wants you to come away with a feeling of that, like, oh, how silly this moment is. Oh, that's how silly all these other guys are.
Right.
But dude, these guys have spent years in the field. I mean, Stephen Meyer, he works for the Discovery Institute now. He writes on intelligent design, but not only that, he's actually spent time working as a geologist. Like, he made his living as a legitimate geologist.
Dude, Michael Behe and Stephen Meyer, it's not that they don't believe in evolution. If you mean change over time in an organism, it's not that they don't believe that. That what they question is the creative power of evolution, where the information comes from, the chicken and the egg scenario where you need proteins to extract information from DNA, but the information for the proteins is in the DNA. Like, they're questioning all these things. They're like looking at this seriously, and they're trying to figure it out, and they're pushing back on the secular narrative. And from an intelligent design perspective, fine, but it's not that they don't believe in evolution. They most certainly do, as we all do. Go ahead.
As an educator, I notice patterns like this. And I keep them in mind, and I keep a record of them so that I can account for them in my next lesson and make each subsequent video better at doing the job of answering the questions at hand and the most common counter-arguments at the same time. And in doing this, I've developed some functional strategies for teaching evolution to creationists in ways that tackle their concerns ahead of time so that they can do a better chance of understanding what I'm actually...
It's not functional. Yes, your strategies are not functional, but that's okay. You have strategies. I'll give you that. Go ahead.
Saying rather than just throwing up the next counter argument. And they can see how science is very much different than whatever their parent or their preacher or whatever PragerU video they've been watching might have told them. That one's real, by the way, Bacteria to Beethoven, in which one of the founders of the Discovery Institute tells you how the leading evolutionary biologists don't actually believe in evolution at all. We saw a little clip of this video in that sequence, and we'll talk about it again in just a minute. But for now, I'm going to start sharing a few of my strategies with you.
I just want to say, isn't that what common ancestry is? From single-celled, simple single-celled organisms, maybe you wouldn't call it a bacteria. We don't actually know what it would be. But from a simple single-celled organism to Beethoven, like that's not a straw man. You might be picking two extreme ends. That's not a straw man. That's what common ancestry is.
Yeah, that's what single-celled organism to a man on the moon. Or, I mean, a single-celled organism that can eventually recount how it became a multi-celled organism. Like, it's when you label something like Bacteria to Beethoven, yeah, that's a catchy title, but
it's clickbait.
It's attention grabbing, but yeah, that's not far off. like it's a fun way of describing what Forrest actually believes. Forrest actually believes.
Yeah.
To help you be more effective communicators when you inevitably sally forth onto the internet to correct all incorrect people like some sort of nerdy Don Quixote. And yes, in that joke, I did just actually describe my job. We'll begin with the easiest and biggest one, which is to correct common misconceptions. Now, this can sound pretty daunting and scary, but I promise it's not nearly as difficult as you might think. The vast, and I mean vast majority of creationist arguments are based in a fundamental misunderstanding of what evolution actually is, not even so much how it actually works. Take a look at these clips from a popular creationist movie called A Matter of Faith, where we see a young woman named Rachel who leaves for home to go off to college to learn biology, only to be taught about the horrors of evolution. In this scene, we see Rachel's father as he expresses his concerns about her introductory biology class to his pastor.
The guy's an evolutionist and a big proponent of it, Pastor. He's written several published articles. I mean, it's a long list. And there's nothing in the whole course description about biblical creation as even a plausible alternative from what I can see.
Does that surprise you? All our public schools and universities teach evolution as the answer to the origins of life. Even some of our Christian schools are buying into the evolution theory as part of the creation account.
You're kidding.
So, in case you weren't aware, evolution is not the origin of life. Those are actually
Pause it real quick.
Different things.
Right. What he's trying to do there is make Christians look like these fundamentalist bumpkins who can't believe that people don't teach creationism in college. Here's my question. What would Forrest say if his kid went to school and came back and said, Dad, all they teach is creationism, not evolution? Would he then go to the school and go, exactly like the guy in the video? You don't teach evolution? Well, no. In fact, a lot of people are starting to teach intelligent design and creation and things. Right? He would be like, really? His response would be exactly the same. And to think that he wouldn't, he probably doesn't think that much, but he doesn't see his worldview. I'm thinking about that much. That he doesn't see that it's his worldview that makes him say these things. Like if roles were reversed, he would say the same thing. Right?
Oh, for sure. Oh, yeah. And I got over that. Like, I used to be so like, oh, we need to have like neutral science classes in schools, and government needs to be neutral, and education system needs to be neutral. we need to put that behind us, because that is a failed experiment if it was not a facade from the get-go.
Yeah.
Like there is no such thing as a neutral science class, or nobody's got a neutral worldview, first of all.
Nope.
Doesn't exist. But he says what bothers me so much about this moment, and this is something that stuck out to me as I was listening to this earlier in the week. When somebody says evolution, it's often shorthand for naturalism, for a naturalistic worldview. And Forrest knows that. He knows that. People use it all the time when they say, "Oh, do you believe I'm an evolutionist," or something like that? And you know that they mean more than just universal common descent. They're talking about that all of life has come about by purely natural and unguided processes, including by necessity abiogenesis as well. Now, see, Forrest is technically right. He's correct in what he's saying here. Like, evolution is not the same thing as abiogenesis. And actually, Charles Darwin never even tried to tackle abiogenesis. He just assumed life to begin with. So if he already had life, Darwin believed he could then explain the diverse ecosystems and species and things like that. But this is just Forrest trying to dunk on people. He got a video that's a little hokey. And then he's looking for opportunities to make them look even dumber.
Yeah. Let's hear what he says about the definition of evolution.
Things. But that doesn't stop creationist media like this from stretching the word evolution to mean the origin of life or anything else and everything else, like they do in this next clip where Rachel is meeting with her friend in the library who wants her to stop believing her professor.
Just answer me this one question. Did God create this world, or did it come about through evolution, like Haman says?
Evan.
Just answer the question, please.
Neither! Because the planet Earth didn't evolve! And so in this one film, we go for evolution being an explanation for the diversity of life, to an explanation for the origin of life, to an explanation for the origin of the planet. And a lot of creationist media will take things...
Hey, Justin, who's really loud?
It might be the Forrest video. He's got that feedback going on.
Oh.
In the microphone. My microphone keeps it. Yeah.
But let us know, Justin. We can adjust our volumes.
Things even further back from that. Take a look at this last clip from a creationist show called The Kennedy Report, which claims to destroy evolution in 5 key points.
We're going to destroy evolution in 5 key points.
What I just said.
So number 1.
Oh, Justin, you just got comment of the night, bro. Comment of the night. Okay. Well, I'm using a mic from a different room. I don't know what to tell you about that. Maybe
I don't know. You sound fine to me, man.
Yeah. I know. Enjoy your night. Thank you. Yeah, maybe get your ears.
1. The Big Bang. There's this idea that basically the universe popped out of nothing, and from there we have what they call the Big Bang.
Now, you may not be aware, but let me be the first to tell you.
I'll give you another test, Aaron.
Yeah. Does this sound better? I can get closer to the mic. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
The Big Bang and evolution are not synonymous terms. They're different things, and yet you would be shocked to hear just how many anti-evolution arguments start with complaints about the origin of life, the chemical evolution of organic compounds, the Big Bang itself, whatever. And this is a remarkably common theme, because if you don't know what evolution is, it's very easy to think that you've debunked it. So this is misconception number 1, that evolution is the explanation for life, the universe, and everything. If you're going to teach evolution to a creationist.
Okay, so first of all, like you said, the problem is with Forrest, because evolution just means change over time.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about evolution, there's a greater worldview, right? There's a secular narrative about where the universe came from.
Yeah.
And the secular narrative is that the entire universe is continuously evolving, right? So you can describe it as like the entire history of the universe. It begins with the Big Bang, and then energy condensed into the simplest elements, and then over the billions of years, gravity pulled these elements together into stars, and then stars exploded and shot the elements out, and then planets formed, and then planets began orbiting around stars, and then, whatever elements formed, and then, like he said, chemical evolution happened, and then the evolution of biology, and the Earth is still evolving, and like evolution, when the creationist uses it, isn't necessarily referring to the evolution of dogs, but the narrative, the secular narrative, right? That everything developed over a long period of time. And it's not an incorrect way to use it. What's incorrect is his limited understanding, I would say, of what creationists are saying, but hey, I'm not a science educator.
Yeah, it's just that he's just more opportunities to dunk, man. That's all he's trying to dunk for applause. That's Forrest's whole shtick.
But if you're an educator, wouldn't you try to understand what the person you're talking to, the way he understands evolution, and then the term, and then break it, like find common ground where you guys are talking about the same thing? I mean, that's why when I talk about evolution, I have to be clear to say, oh, I don't mean dog breeds evolution. I mean tree of life, neo-Darwinian, common ancestry evolution. Like, you have to be very specific.
Yeah.
First crucial step is understanding what evolution actually is. Memorize this definition. This is the textbook definition of evolution. It's any change in the heritable characteristics of a population over the course of multiple generations. When you understand this definition and have it locked down, you can combat a lot of misinformation, a lot of misconceptions. For example, we've all heard this one. Well, why don't we ever see a dog giving birth to a non-dog? Well, because that would be a major change in a population over just one generation rather than a lot of them. That's not how speciation or actually how anything at all works. We're talking about a change in heritable characteristics, which, by the way, you can see between different populations of dogs, like different dog breeds and stuff. Yeah, but that's adaptation, not evolution. No. Adaptation is the process by which new traits are acquired. It's a function of the change in heritable characteristics that we're talking about, and no matter how you slice it, it's a major part of the definition of evolution, because adaptation is to evolution what the angular momentum of a wheel is to driving a car.
So pause real quick. Well, then nobody disputes that. That right there is not in dispute. So I'm not exactly sure who he's arguing with at this point, but no one's arguing that organisms don't change over time. That's observable. Like, everybody understands that. You do that experiment in science class in high school with the fruit fly. Like no one's making, you're making this connection. I don't understand. Like, this is what bugs me, is he knows better. He knows better.
He does. Dude, we know, like he mentioned, it's like dogs, a differentiation in different kinds of dogs. Look, we know most dog breeds that we have today did not exist in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Like they're really only a few hundred years old, and that's not a problem. Like, for sure, like we know that, but that's not the same thing as neo-Darwinianism. Neo-Darwinism, as what he's talking about. It's like, yeah, for sure. I totally agree. Yeah. Dogs change a lot. People selectively breed dogs to emphasize different traits for different purposes and things like that.
Yeah,
because
we get
that is the amount of change we see in dog breeds is not at the rate that he would expect to see changes for human evolution.
And it's not in any way, it doesn't in any way refute or discredit or go against creationism. Like that change over time is something we would expect in the creation model, where God created life to be able to diversify. There's nothing crazy about that. There's nothing anti-creationist about that idea. So we're all on board there.
Well, then why haven't my cats evolved into humans yet? Well, that's because your cat is an individual, not a population, and is only alive for one generation, not several. And even if we were watching a population of cats evolve, they certainly wouldn't have a reason to evolve into humans. You don't want to get me started on selection pressure, Kathy. You don't want to hear it. Remember, evolution is not a ladder.
Dude. Like, he just likes to, he must rehearse that. There's no way that came off the dome. Is he like a battle rapper or something? How does he think so fast?
No, Forrest, he's good at theatrics for sure. I mean, that's how he's got such a huge following. That's like how he got the 1.4 million followers on TikTok and things like that, because he's really good at theater. He's really good at theater. I want to highlight this comment because he's loved. Y'all should call him. I assume that live is what you probably meant because we're talking about the Line channel. We hit on that earlier. Those are not constructive channels. Those channels are not designed to be grounds for like healthy debate and discussion. They're designed. Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I mean, like I've already said, they're designed. It's a channel for atheists. It's a channel of atheists for atheists, and they need, because I think the atheistic worldview doesn't have enough to chew on for itself, enough to fuel its own fire. They need those phone calls because there's just not enough meat on the bone for the meal themselves. And so it's really, I mean, if you just go watch it, you can see like it's not a healthy discussion. Rarely.
Yeah, and so I would also like to say that I would not be intimidated to debate or to talk to. I wouldn't like do a formal debate, but I would not be intimidated to talk to Forrest Valkai. I wouldn't do it on his terms, but I wouldn't be afraid to talk to him. There might be someone better that has more education, maybe someone like Dr. Lyle or whoever. Or Nathaniel Jensen would be a good one to talk to him. But if I had a conversation with Forrest on a podcast, the podcast would be about 8 hours long because I wouldn't let him do that. I would stop and I would say, okay, hold on. You just said that. I haven't learned that yet. That's fine. Let's dig into that thing right there. And we're going to do this in a little bit. And I promise you, because I've done this 1 million times with these people, whatever they say, once I dig into it, it's never the way they present it. And so it would just have to be a slow conversation because I would stop them and say, no, we're going to dig into that. What study are you referencing when you say that? Let's dig into that. Let's look at what really happened. And I promise when we came out of it, creationism would be able to satisfy all the data that needs satisfying.
We call that
not
move
intimidated by that at all.
We call that move the paper slam. And you'll see atheists and naturalists do this where they'll cite, like you'll be having a discussion and say, you might say something, for example, like, I don't think we've ever seen intelligence or functional design come from non-intelligence or preceding functional design. Yeah. And then they'll say something like, oh yeah, we have, it's documented in this paper.
Yeah.
And you've got two choices. You can either let them have that point, or you can do what Aaron does and pretty much pause the debate, bring up the paper, and conduct an analysis to really see if it's actually making the point that they are asserting that it makes.
Guys, this is like the easiest thing to do because we now have access to things like tools like ChatGPT. Someone can reference a study. And I would not saying you say, hey, ChatGPT, tell me about this study. Pull the study up and read it. And there's going to be a lot of technical things that are in there. You don't need to be able to do chemical equations to understand a paper. You read it, and the words that you understand, you sort of get an idea. And when you're stuck, you copy it, you paste it into ChatGPT, and you say, hey, put this in layman's terms for me, right? And it will make it understandable. It's not impossible. And if you don't trust a tool like that, then ask somebody. But these papers can be made understandable. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying ask ChatGPT to do it for you. I'm saying go get the paper, read what you can. When you can't understand it, copy and paste a couple of sentences in there and ask for just a layman's terms. It's a amazing tool for pushing through this kind of rhetoric.
Yeah, and it's like, dude, something that's been going on right now. So with Wes Huff,
it really is.
When he was on Joe Rogan, he said that the Isaiah scroll is word for word, a word for word copy, or the Masoretic text was a word for word copy of what we found in the Great Isaiah scroll. And so, dude, that comment has spun off all of these reaction videos, like responses to responses to responses, talking about like, how word for word is it? Like, what does that really mean? And the best thing that you can do is just go look at the comparison yourself. Like you're gonna
there on the internet.
our buddy Dan McClellan, that we criticize, or no, I won't say criticize, we
Yeah.
commented
You're so
on.
nice.
I gotta be nice to him, man. Poor little fella. No, but he puts his 2 cents out there. Alex O'Connor's got his 2 cents out here. All these other James White, they put their comments out there. And what really you've got to do is eventually you can either just choose somebody to trust and be like, I like what he says, so I think that's going to be the end of it for me. But really, like if you want to put in some of the work, just go. You can go online and look at the two. You can look at the Masoretic text. You can look at the Isaiah scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and read them. I mean, translated in English. Read them and see what words and spellings are different, and then come to your own conclusion.
Yeah,
you just got.
We're gonna actually do that here in a second. We're gonna do that
All
in a second. We'll go ahead and let them.
Ladder, it doesn't have a goal. There's nothing in that definition that I just gave you about becoming smarter, better, faster, stronger, more complex, or anything like that. It's just about change over time. Yeah, but the change you're talking about
is just say one thing. Just remember he said that. Remember he said that. It's not about becoming smarter, better, faster, stronger, more complex, or anything like that. It's about change over time. It's about reproduction of the okayest. Just remember that. Now go ahead and go.
Look at this comment. Dan's got a video saying the Bible absolutely condones slavery. And dude, a scholar should be more nuanced than that. Dan's goal is not nuance. Dan is a contrarian, and his goal is just to be as much of a contrarian towards conservative biblical scholars as wherever possible.
Wherever possible.
That's what he wakes up in the morning, and that's his goal.
Yeah.
It's just random changes in DNA. This one is super common. It's almost always paired with the claim that mutations are always destructive and therefore can't create anything. Check out this clip from Answers in Genesis saying exactly that.
Genetic mutation may sound creative when used in pop culture references where superheroes gain fantastic abilities.
Okay, I put that in there. That was me. I'm sorry. That wasn't actually what they were saying. That was me. This is what they actually said.
But in actuality, they are genetic copying mistakes caused by various factors that occur when DNA produces copies of itself, far from producing useful and novel genetic information. Mutations tend to break things. They degrade the existing genetic code already in place.
But that's fundamentally untrue. Not only does it assume that DNA...
Real quick, it's actually fundamentally true. No one's assuming that DNA was ever perfect. That's not a thing. But when you're observing what's happening, overwhelmingly, it's either neutral or deleterious. It's very, very rarely beneficial. And even the term beneficial comes with a lot of nuance. Mm-hmm. So it is absolutely, maybe there's a better way to say it, but that is not untrue. It's overwhelmingly not beneficial. Go ahead.
And I mean, think about the probabilities here. When we're talking about a worldview that's absurd, which is the way he talks about creationism and the Christian worldview. Mm-hmm. Imagine you've got a program like Excel or something like that, and there's all kinds of code under the hood of Microsoft Excel, tons of code. If you started inputting random changes into that code, would you expect to eventually get a better performing Excel, or would you have a degraded program that eventually ceases to be a functional program at all because it's broken down so much?
Yeah.
Now, that's going to be the most likely outcome by a light. I'll say a light year. By a light year. But you give them time. And I think he talks about that at some point.
Yeah.
But you give them time, and they believe that actually code can become more refined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is totally contrary to what we'd observe. Actually,
it's contrary to what we observe. Yeah.
DNA was once perfect and is now deviating away from that perfection, which doesn't make any sense in the first place. But it also neglects to think about the fact that there's lots of different kinds of...
Wait. I would actually say from the creationist view, it is, right? When God created the world, DNA was perfect. There weren't mutations, right? Before the fall, everything was exactly as it's supposed to be. And mutations, and not necessarily speciation, but diseases and problems and that come from mutations are definitely part of the fall. So that's his worldview talking. That was a philosophical point, but that's his worldview talking that DNA didn't start perfect. We would argue that it did, right?
Yep.
And what we see is a result of the fall. It's perfectly consistent with creationism. What we observe is perfectly consistent with creationism.
Of mutations out there. Ooh, goodness. There's lots of different kinds of mutations out there. Here's just a few of them, and that doesn't even cover the different kinds of point mutations.
What?
Just let him get through this part.
Out there. And also, not all mutations are bad. Some of them are beneficial. Most of them do nothing. And all of this is contextual anyway, because when you gain fitness in one environment, you necessarily lose fitness in another environment. Yeah, but the DNA is still the most important thing. The DNA has to be perfect for the organisms. That's what it's all about, right? Just all about DNA getting changed. No.
No one said that.
Phenotype, not genotype, is what's selected for, because it's your physical body, not your DNA, that's interacting with your environment and experiencing selection pressure. Not all your DNA is expressed all the time. Some of it is never expressed at all. Also, remember, the definition of evolution says heritable characteristics. That might include mutations. It could also include epigenetic information. It could also include gene regulatory networks. It could also include developmental pathways. All of those things affect your phenotype, which will affect your survival. Yeah, but that's just what it is. It's survival, right? Survival of the fittest. If it's all about survival, then why do we age? Why do we get cancer? Why can't we breathe underwater? No, it's not about survival of the fittest. It's about reproduction of the okayest. That is how evolution actually works.
All right, so pause for just a second. Okay, so what he was saying is that it's not just mutation, right? There's these other developmental pathways, okay? Epigenetic information, gene regulatory networks, and developmental pathways, okay? The broad term for this is mechanisms through which genes are either expressed or suppressed, okay? So that's epigenetic information, gene regulatory networks, and developmental pathways all deal with the expression or suppression of genes, okay? But in the evolutionary worldview, where did those genes come from? Mutation. So ultimately, at the foundation is mutation, right? You're right. Genes are being turned on and off, and you can put pressure on an organism and, you'll lose some genetic information, and a gene that wasn't expressed now becomes expressed. That doesn't change the fact that all of that information that's being turned on and off, which the three things he said, epigenetic information, gene regulatory networks, and developmental pathways, are all sort of expressing the same thing. But at the bottom is mutation. So you're not wrong when you lean into mutation, into functional genes through random mutation. If you don't understand the math behind it, it's absolutely preposterous. It's takes more faith to believe that. It's just, and when I say faith, I mean the non-Christian definition of faith. I mean believing in something without any evidence.
Without evidence,
But anyways, those things no one's arguing against. We can observe it. We see that genes get turned on and off. This is not anything. We have yet to address a creationist argument, right? And so I don't really know. He knows better, and maybe he doesn't know better. Maybe he doesn't engage enough creationist scientists to understand what their arguments are. But I happen to think he does know better. He's just not actually serious about teaching creationism or evolution to creationists. I think what he actually wants to do is mock and degrade and condescend. And that's why that's where the problem comes from.
Yeah, I would love to see Forrest interact with, actually have an organized, respectful dialogue with somebody credentialed in the field that he critiques.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I haven't found that. Now he's not obligated to do that. I'm not saying if he wants to do these atheist shows, then he's obligated to have these similar kinds of conversations. But I listened to political commentator Ben Shapiro talking about why he goes on shows like not The Line, but middle ground, where they like have the person in the chair.
Jubilee.
Yeah, Jubilee. And he was like, people that like to listen to me like to hear me interact with people I disagree with,
Mhm.
And so he goes on that in that kind of environment, so people that like Ben Shapiro can hear some of his ideas tested. Now,
Yeah,
Forrest would probably
exactly.
say, well, he does that every night, on the Atheist Experience, but that's not count,
Not
man.
if you've ever watched the Atheist Experience.
That's right.
Yeah. But anyway, we can.
All that matters is if you're able to reproduce more than other individuals in your population, in time, those heritable characteristics will become more abundant in that population. You increase in frequency, and that's the definition of evolution. It's just all about change. And when you remind them of that, you almost always get hit with this one. Yeah, but that's changes within a species, not changes across kinds. Microevolution is real, but macroevolution is not. That is a huge one. Take a look at this clip again from that same Answers in Genesis video as they make this claim.
Evolutionists like to refer to the sort of variation we see among individual kinds of animals as microevolution, implying that this is somehow related to the chance formation of fundamentally new animals by the supposedly existing but never observed process known as macroevolution. However, there is no demonstrable experiment relating so-called microevolution and macroevolution, which makes these terms highly misleading.
There is no demonstrable experiment relating that man to his parents. There may be some phenotypic and maybe even genetic similarities, but no one has ever observed his parents having sex and producing him as a child, which means it's completely a matter of faith, whether you believe that he is actually produced by the person that he calls his mother, or if he emerged from her back with the rest of her brood like the mighty Suriname toad, wiggly and horrifying.
All right, pause it real quick. I don't even understand what he's saying there. Like, why did he bring this up? Someone is saying you can't demonstrate where microevolution actually leads to entirely new body plans and organisms. It's something that's inferred when we look back at the past, but it's not something we're observing today, right? And then he goes and says, yeah, but that man is the child of his parents, which would be microevolution. Is he saying that?
He's saying you can't observe it. Like
You can't, but you can't observe. But what I don't understand what he's saying here, because two parents having a kid isn't an example of macroevolution. It would be an example of microevolution. It's not an example of macroevolution. So I don't really know where he's going. I feel like he almost made the creationist argument there.
It's like something you've said before, Aaron, where like, don't hate the question.
Yeah.
He hates that question, or he hates that point. So he mocks the question.
Yeah.
Because you cannot organize an experiment in a lab that would conclusively demonstrate macroevolution. Like, you just can't do it. And I think he's saying that, like, oh, you can't do it. Just like if you couldn't witness.
Oh, you think that's what he's saying? Okay.
Like yeah, if somebody questioned somebody's John Doe's parents, you couldn't test whether or not they were actually his parents in a lab, or via an experiment, an observable experiment in that way.
Yeah, I be honest with you, you were probably being more charitable. I think he probably wanted to give his little toad speech is really where he was going.
No, I think he wanted to do that too, for sure. But I think that's the point. He's recognizing, like, yeah, like, this is not something you can do in an experiment, in an organized experiment. It's not something that you could put variables in. You couldn't put inputs and then expect the output to be macroevolution.
Yeah, which I think is interesting, right? If it's just based on natural laws and physical processes, why is it so difficult to predict? But okay, that makes sense now. I see what you're saying. You can't do the experiment. You can't, well, I guess you could record it, but people usually don't record what's happening there. Oh, I lost. Oh, there he's back. Okay.
I'm back.
Okay.
If you thought for 1 second that you were going to listen to a biologist speak and you weren't going to see some gross shit, I don't think you've ever seen a biologist speak. When we point to undeniable phenotypic changes within and across populations. Creationists will argue that changing phenotypes or even changing species isn't actually evolution, because evolution requires a change of so-called kinds. And when we show them undeniable changes across the fossil record, well, that's rarely good enough either, because again, these are all issues of understanding terminology.
We'll pause it real quick. That is actually deniable, but there's something I wanted to point out real quick. When he brought up epigenetics, and he said evolution is heritable change over generations, right? Then he really contradicted himself, because genes being expressed or suppressed might be translated, could be translated, through reproduction over generations. A lot of times something happens and then, an organism dies and it's never passed on, or it only lasts one generation or one or two generations. It doesn't necessarily continue on. So that I just wanted to go back and say that was the thing that was in my head, that appealing to, genes being switched on and off kind of goes against his original definition of evolution.
Yeah, I was thinking about this again, man. He just put up a chart. He just put up your boat to truck chart.
Yeah,
with the skulls lined up.
Easy.
I'm like, this is exactly it's so obvious. Like, look.
Situated equilibrium. It is the idea, in essence, the idea at least, that a lizard lays an egg and out comes a bird fully formed with wings and tail feathers.
That's not what that means, either in essence or in reality. Also, even if these so-called changes in kinds were as rare as creationists like to pretend, this claim that we've never observed macroevolution isn't even true either. There are plenty of experiments out there showing single-celled organisms evolving into multi-celled organisms. That's a major jump in evolution.
Pause that. This is what I want to talk about real quick. All right, guys. When someone just drops something like that on you and says there are lots of experiments where single-celled organisms become multi-celled organisms. When I watched this and he said that, it caught me, right? I was like, oh, hey, that's interesting. Now, I used to panic a little bit until I started digging into the paper drops. And over again, as I do that, I come to the same conclusion, which is this doesn't actually discredit or disprove anything about creationism. In fact, a lot of times it just supports what I would have expected. This is a good example of that. Okay, so lots of experiments where single-celled organisms became multi-celled organisms. There are experiments where single-celled organisms became multi-celled organisms, the most famous of which is the snowflake yeast. Okay, so they did this experiment where they took this yeast and they put it in an environment. They put it in an environment that rewarded heavier organisms. And so they put it in a liquid environment, and as the yeast sank, they collected the yeast that sank first, right? And then they took that yeast that sank first and they put it again in an environment and let it reproduce. And the yeast that sank first, they gathered that. And they did that initially 50 times. Okay. Then they took the experiment out to 3,000 generations. They did that. And all they were doing was putting a specific pressure on the yeast and collecting the yeast that that fell to the bottom. Okay. Fastest. Fell to the bottom fastest. Okay. Over time, these clusters or these yeast cells evolved into more complex multicellular structures. That's what they were calling the snowflake yeast. Okay. In fact, these yeast grouped together in I don't know, colonies, I guess you would call it. There were 20,000 times their unicellular ancestors. Okay. In fact, they were visible to the naked eye. So these yeast cells were clumping together. Okay. The clusters that were clumping together developed different physical properties. Okay. They were less fragile. They were less gelatinous. They were stronger. They changed shape. They became elongated. They stuck together. Okay. And this allowed these clusters to continue to grow and grow and grow and get bigger and bigger over time without fragmenting. Okay. Also, this is from the experiment. I mean, I looked up the actual paper that was written. Okay. The metabolic activity of these clusters generated internal fluid flows that facilitated nutrient distribution to support the growth beyond just simple diffusion, right? Now, that actually sounds like an organism evolving from a single-celled organism to a multi-celled organism. But then you dig into it and you start to ask questions like, well, what does that mean? Okay. What does it mean when it goes from single-celled to multi-celled? Okay. Well, first of all, let's keep in, it did not become a multicellular creature like you or I, Tim, where you have skin, hair, bones, muscle, liver, organs, all these different cell types that cannot survive by themselves. In these yeast clusters, you could take any one of the individual yeast cells, and they did this in the experiment, out and isolate it, and it'll reproduce and do just fine. And it'll continue to form these clustering snowflake yeast colonies, right? So it's not multicellular like you or me, or like a true complex organism, okay? It's actually more like a colony of yeast, okay? What happened was, because they were only collecting yeast that fell the fastest, there were 3 genes, I'm reading notes if you're wondering, CLN3, CLB2, and GIN4 were deleted. 3 genes were deleted. So they lost genetic material. Those genes regulate the shape of the cell, the thickness of the cell wall, and how they, and whether they stick together. These are bad mutations. If they weren't put in an environment specifically by these scientists that rewarded these features, this yeast would die in the wild. Like, the fact that 2 yeast cells stick together is actually a mistake. When the yeast reproduces, it's supposed to break apart, but sometimes there's a mutation and that breaking apart doesn't happen. And now the 2 yeast cells stick together, but because of competition in nature, those typically die, which is why for bajillions of years, according to the evolutionary model, yeast has kind of been the same single-celled organism, right? So these traits that they developed were through loss of genetic information and would have actually killed them in nature. So these researchers applied these selective pressures. These yeast clusters formed, right? Because different genes were expressed, genes that were already there, different genes were expressed, the yeast changed shape, got stronger, and stuck together. No new information was added. They didn't evolve into a multicellular creature that's going to like crawl out of the water, right? What they became is colonies. Now, from that point on, because they lost genetic information, these genes can never be unexpressed. This is the way this yeast will grow from now on, right? Okay, that's fine. I'm sorry, but it's still single-celled yeast organisms that have specific traits that allow them to clump into colonies. And even in the experiment, they say true multicellular life, like how that happened, is unknown. But this gives an idea of how something like that might have happened. That's like in the abstract, actually. That's in the first 6 sentences of the abstract. And so, yeah, so they did all these experiments. So that's what they came up with. They did not evolve into true multicellular life. They changed in a way they would have died in nature because they were rewarded specifically for those traits. And those traits led to clumping.
That's fascinating.
And that is what he's referring to. Now, they did this also with algae and predators. The algae would come together when you applied predation pressure. And then when the pressure was gone, they would go back to single-celled organisms. And then there was another one done with amoeba, and the amoeba will group together when food's scarce, and then when there's food, they break apart again. Now, but just based on what I just told you there, I mean, that's downright dishonest what he just said. You know, I hope that was clear.
Yeah.
But that was just downright dishonest.
That's what can, for just, you know, your average person, your average Christian or whoever, talking with somebody like this, it's hard to see through some of that because it's going to take you 4 hours of research afterwards to actually figure out if what they've even said was accurate.
Made sense. Oh, one other thing I want to point out, the exchange of nutrients that they talked about. That was one I was like, oh, tell me about the exchange of nutrients. It was actually just due to natural laws, like physical laws, like the laws of, I think it's Fisk's laws of concentration or something, but molecules tend to move from higher concentration to lower concentration places. They actually don't know the exact reason, but the fluid flow between the yeast cells was not the yeast sharing nutrients. It was just natural laws. Like this would have happened if it was a pile of rocks. You know what I mean? It's the way the fluid settled through the yeast cells. Does that make sense? So it wasn't something the yeast were doing. It was a passive effect just based on natural laws, convection and laws of concentration. So anyway, my point is just this, is that in the end, they're still yeast cells. They're still single-celled organisms that clump together. They're not true multicellular organisms like you and I.
Well, what's your thoughts on this comment here, Aaron? So how differently might they be after 300,000 generations under selective pressure? And let me see my thought. Let me tell you my thought on this, Aaron. You can tell me if I'm correct. Based on the evidence we have from the way that the yeast gathered into colonies and the traits that they lost, after 300,000 generations, would we have we wouldn't have any evidence to suggest they would be anything else except for larger yeast colonies.
Yeah. There's no other evidence. Really, in nature, we have evidence that they would be dead.
Right. And yeah.
Right. But in this intelligently designed experiment.
There we go.
What up? We were able to put selective pressures on them. But just like in a general way, I love this question. Let's go back to it real quick. Because this is evolution. It's a story. And the question you're asking is, what is the story? How can I imagine in the future what this might be? I'm not trying to imagine in the future what might happen and then build a whole worldview around that. If in 300,000 generations, they truly become multi-celled organisms with differentiated tissue, submit an appeal. But until then, we don't have evidence for that. And it's borderline dishonest because Forrest knows better. Well, maybe he only reads the abstract and the title.
Here's another point. The naturalist or the atheist needs it to happen.
That's true.
They need that single-celled organism to evolve into a complex organism because there is no alternate theory in terms of how did human life originate from a naturalist
the only game in town.
And so
it's the only game in town.
The data has to be worked into a way that fits that pre-commitment to their worldview.
Yeah. And when you think of multicellular life, you think about specialization. You don't think about single cells clumping together. And in the end, they were still yeast. They were still the same yeast with expressing genetic data that was already there. That's the other thing. He asked about 300,000 generations. They didn't gain any new data, any new gene information. The changes that happened that changed the shape and the thickness and the was all information that was already there. These genes were already there. They were just suppressed. And through mutations, they became expressed. I'm sorry, man. I'm not down with your story. And that's the biggest thing. I'm just not down with the story.
Down with this story, though. This makes a lot of sense. I just love it, dude. It's it's so funny.
It's perfect.
That is, if anything, a change in kinds. But that's getting into another talk for another time. The point is, if you want to teach evolution to a creationist, understanding the definition of the word is half the battle. Next tip in teaching evolution to creationists is to signal to other sciences. Approaching evolution head-on can be intimidating and off-putting for a lot of new learners. So sometimes it's important to show how the study of evolution impacts other sciences, especially if those other sciences impact their lives. Consider, for example, the fossil fuel industry, which is entirely reliant on the idea that we live on an old Earth full of oil from long-dead organic matter from the Carboniferous period, or the healthcare industry,
Hold on,
which is
pause real quick.
100%
No, let it go. Let him go. Let him go. That's fine. I'll get it at the end.
dependent on our understanding of the evolution of pathogens and the evolutionary development of organs and tissues and things. If we don't understand how bacteria and viruses evolve, we can't make good vaccines and antibiotics. Although, if you're talking to a creationist, maybe be careful mentioning vaccines. But what about food? Everybody likes food, right? And the entire business of agriculture revolves around the concept of artificial selection. Take a look at corn, which was adapted by humans from a barely edible grass into its delicious state that we have today over the past 6,000 years. And it doesn't just stop at corn. Do you like cruciferous?
We'll stop there real quick. So the corn example, the genetically modified or selectively breeding plants to get better food or more food out of a crop is example of microevolution. So again, we didn't create new information. We just selected for genes that were already there. It's 1,000% false that the entire fossil fuel industry is based on an old Earth. You don't need the Earth to be old to find fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are found with seismic surveys, sedimentary rock analysis, structural geology, and drilling exploration. Do they date rocks sometimes to try to get more information? Yes. Is the Earth being old a pivotal point in order to find fossil fuels? No. It's absolutely unimportant. It doesn't really matter if oil got there over 1 billion years, or if God created and put oil there, or if the flood caused oil to be there. As long as you make the same assumptions, you're going to get the same results. So if you analyze the Earth, assuming it's young, and you look for these features through a young Earth perspective where fossil fuels are found, you're going to, as long as you consistently apply those standards, you're going to find fossil fuels. And the same thing is with an old Earth. As long as you're consistent with your assumptions, you'll find fossil fuels. But I can tell you right now, it has nothing to do with the Earth being old, which, by the way, Forrest already said has nothing to do with evolution. That's not even part of the definition of evolution. So I'm not sure why we're bringing it up. But
also, additionally, Stephen Meyer, he studied sedimentary geology. Now, I know he's not necessarily in the young Earth business. He doesn't talk about that too much, as he is intelligent design. But again, this is somebody that Forrest calls a charlatan, a quack.
Yeah.
And that he worked in that field for a fossil fuel company.
Using old Earth methods to find fossil fuels. What a quack. Okay.
Cruciferous vegetables, which is
real quick.
literally
Medicine does not rely on evolution to be true. One, we were doing medicine way before we had all the information we have now about evolution, the common ground information we have about evolution. In order to make a vaccine, you don't need to know how organisms, bacteria, and viruses evolve. We were making vaccines well before that. Maybe it helps you predict or understand what could happen, but making vaccines, one, evolution is random. These mutations and changes are random. Sure, they happen through, things get weeded out through selective pressure, but if you're giving someone an antibiotic and all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore, you can then look at the bacteria, see what's changed, and then change your vaccine. That doesn't require common ancestry. It doesn't require an old Earth. It doesn't require anything that he's leaning into. It actually is completely consistent and makes 100% sense in the creation model. You know, like that's just 1,000% false that medicine 100% relies on it. I'm not even sure why he would say that.
I kind of feel like his vaccine comment here is just another attempt to dunk and get applause.
Yeah.
Just to get some eye rolls from his audience to think like, oh, Christians are dumb.
Yeah.
Biologists would ever use for things like broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi. All of these things are from the same plant. They are the same species that we have adapted into totally different shapes and styles and flavors and colors, all because of random mutations that we liked and we selected for. If you've ever bought any food from a grocery store or grown your own commercial seeds at home, you have benefited from the study of evolution. You're eating the evolution. The evolution is inside you.
Oh my God!
Yeah, but again, he hasn't addressed a creationist argument yet, because all of that is completely expected and predicted within the creationist worldview. Like, I don't get it. I don't get what we're doing.
It's the same dog thing that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Selectively breeding dogs and producing dogs with specific traits to serve specific purposes. Like, nobody denies that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really get where he's going. He hasn't made any argument that is anti-creationist, and he certainly hasn't taught a creationist anything about evolution, because we're already on the same page with the things he's saying. All right, so we can go on.
Those are the Darwinists eating so it's fine. Another critical thing to keep in mind when teaching evolution to a creationist is to deviate from dogma and dualism. So many creationists are trapped in dogmatic thinking, and for that reason, they're incredibly uncomfortable with the fuzzy, complicated answers that science often provides. Take a look at this clip of John and Jane again as they learn about mass extinctions.
Here it says, until recently, researchers looked for a single cause for each mass extinction. Then it continues. Many mass extinctions, however, were probably caused by several factors working in combination: volcanic eruptions, moving continents, and changing sea levels.
You mean they only have several different ideas about what caused mass extinctions?
John, that's not at all what she just said.
Right, but they just listed everything that would be taking place during the worldwide flood.
What?
What John and Jane are experiencing here isn't some
By the way, I want to comment on. I appreciate the encouragement from Mabuse, whatever your name is. Hey, we appreciate that you're here to tell us how wrong we are, man. For sure.
Hey, if you can point out specifically something I said besides everything out of your mouth,
something that we could interact with, chew on a little bit, we'll definitely do it. But he said he's trying to. Forrest said here he wants to pull people out of dogma. Dude, atheists are dogmatic. If one of the definitions of dogmatic was where you embrace an idea uncritically or without criticism and you just embrace it, dude, think about over the past 10 years and the culture and how things in terms of sexual identity and sexual ethics and stuff, how that has changed, gender identity. Dude, people accepted that first, and now they're looking for science to back it up later. They accepted this dogmatically, and now they're scrambling and not doing well and trying to justify things scientifically.
Mm-hmm.
That is dogmatic thinking.
Yeah,
atheists have dogmatic beliefs, hands down.
Yeah, it's 100%. And if you can't see it in someone like Forrest, it can't be any more. Yeah, they are. They're dogmatic. Sure. There's no. Oh, I said I rarely met a truly non-dogmatic.
Yeah,
I think I misread his. Yeah, truly not. No, they have a worldview. They're committed to it. You can't shake it. It includes certain presuppositions that they won't let go of.
Hey, check. So, Corpse here says it seems like y'all confused abiogenesis and evolution for one. No, dude. We know the difference.
Yeah, we already addressed that a long time ago.
We talked about that earlier, and Forrest brings up that same thing. Like he showed.
Besides, I reject the distinction. I reject that evolution, the term evolution can't include abiogenesis, but if you want to be particular, we can be particular. But I'm sorry.
Abiogenesis is necessarily part of evolution. Like you've got to have abiogenesis to get to evolution.
Yeah.
You can be technical, and Corpse here is doing exactly what Forrest wanted people to do to correct them on like the definition of atheism. Like we know what it means, man. But oftentimes the term evolution is shorthand for a worldview, a naturalistic worldview.
Yeah.
Admission of ignorance, it's honesty. It's explaining the fact that there are many factors at play in these globally cataclysmic events, and as is often the case in biology, there may be multiple correct answers as to why one thing happens. But the allure of a simple, clear-cut answer is far more comfortable, and so they fall back to the flood. Helping creationists understand that our scientific understanding is a reflection of reality, not reality itself, is critically important. Personally, I love drawing the analogy of a map. Every map of the Earth is wrong. They're warped, they're distorted, the resolution is tiny, the coastlines make no sense. But a map isn't what the Earth looks like. The Earth is what the Earth looks like. Every map is wrong, but some maps are useful. And we're better off using them if we want to understand certain things about the surface of the planet. Similarly, all scientific models and theories are wrong, but some of them are useful. And if you want a better one, you need to be out here collecting the data with us, because reality is what reality looks like, not the model.
Let's stop it there.
Another common dogmatic mistake.
That's a philosophical position. Reality is what reality is. Creationists are out there gathering data, putting it forward, writing books, doing more than regurgitating what other people say on TikTok. You're just rejecting the evidence, right? So you reject it a priori because they're pseudoscience and creationism isn't true and miracles can't happen, and you have a specific atheistic scientism that drives your dogmatic thinking. But I just want to pause for a second, if you don't mind. Can you go back and pick up Corpse 6 Rinder's comment there? Science is a living process that corrects over time. Now, keep that in mind here. As Forrest literally just said, every scientific model is wrong. Okay? Earlier, he said, evolution's not about becoming smarter, better, faster, stronger, more complex, or anything like that. It's just about change over time. He said it's not survival of the fittest. It's about reproduction of the okayest. All that matters is if you're able to reproduce more than other individuals in a population. In time, those heritable characteristics become more abundant in that population, increase in frequency, and that's the definition of evolution. It's just all about change. Okay? Then he made the flip to philosophy here, and he says reality is reality. And then we have this: religion is stuck in old books and dogma. Science is a living process that corrects errors over time. Look, in Forrest evolutionist worldview, we all evolved from a single organism through random changes. It's all material. And people can look this up. If it's really important, I can find the source and put it in the comments. 84% of the world's population engages in religious behaviors. So clearly, the majority of the world's population, human population, engages in religious behaviors. According to evolutionary theory, those behaviors evolved because they provided some sort of reproductive advantage. Remember, it's not about getting smarter, faster, or stronger. It's about reproducing, and that's it. So religious behaviors provided some reproductive advantage, but you think that they're false. They're delusional. People who believe in religion are delusional. That means that within your system, Forrest, within your system, Corpse 6 Rinder, 84% of the most successful organism that has ever been on the earth, that has evolved, believes a delusion that you think is patently false. And that delusion is a necessary feature of the system, right? Because you don't need to be smarter. You don't need truth. What you need to do is reproduce and survive.
It sounds like that. It sounds like that, and that the group that has that delusion, the majority group, has more evolutionary benefit than those that even believe that evolution is true. So it
Right.
seems like the evolutionists are actually the most harmful group to the actual evolutionary process that gets Forrest so excited about.
Yes, only like less than 7% of the world considers themselves atheists. You guys are the new kid on the block. But that means your system overwhelmingly, your evolutionary system overwhelmingly produces delusional organisms who, despite believing false beliefs, engage in the scientific method that you say leads to truth. You've already admitted that truth isn't necessary for survival. You've already admitted that the scientific model is wrong. We can see with our own eyes that evolution leads to delusional creatures. So I want to know, Forrest, why on earth would I trust anything you say about truth, logic, reality, if you, in your system, truth is optional, evolution produces delusional organisms, and all scientific models are wrong? Do you see how his worldview is self-defeating? Like in his worldview, if evolution is true, we could never know it. We would never be able to know if we're delusional. Now, the atheist will say, the evolutionist will say, yeah, but I engage with the world every day and I do just fine. And I say, yes, precisely because your worldview is false. Because it's false, because you live in God's world under God's rules, and God gives us a world we can understand, organisms that we can classify. I mean, part of be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth involves being able to understand the earth, because he gives us regularity in nature, because he gives us reasoning processes that work, because we have morals that reflect his nature, so we value truth telling, not lying to each other. Because of everything that evolution doesn't give you, that's why you can use the scientific method. So I don't want to hear any appeal to the scientific method from anybody who believes in that system. And that was my theatrical Forrest.
All right.
Anyway,
The creationists
that bothered
make
me
is
when
to
he
think
said
that
that.
if they want to tear down our belief system, all they have to do is tear down one of our gods. I'm genuinely sorry for what I'm about to say. Listen to Ken Ham.
And it's interesting, back in 1954, George Wald, an American biochemist who received the Nobel Prize, said this: time is the hero of the plot. What we regard as impossible on the basis of human experience is meaningless here. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible, the possible probable, the probable virtually certain. One only has to wait. Time itself performs the miracles. And so really, for the secularists, time is one of their gods, because it performs the miracles.
He goes on to say that if you just tell an evolutionist that you don't believe in millions of years, they'll go berserk because their worldview falls apart. As undeniably awesome as the concept of a time god is, that's not how thinking works. So this is part of the reason why there's so much quote mining, for example, that we see around the whole evolution debate, where creationists will find some great scientists, especially some great biologists, and say that this guy says that evolution isn't real.
No, so that quote, that is an accurate statement. Time, I do affirm that time, I'll stand by that, that time is the God of the gaps argument for atheists. You just add enough time, you add enough millions or billions of years,
enough chance, enough randomness.
Yeah, you get a monkey smashing keys. Actually, the odds, the whatever the mathematical odds are, and I don't have them in front of me. People have calculated them. John Lennox does a great job discussing the mathematical problem of evolution. But we've all heard the analogy of a monkey just smashing keys on a typewriter, eventually producing Shakespeare. The odds that would happen is actually would be far more probable than all of life and all of its complexities that we know today, purely arising out of naturalistic processes. Because in the monkey, you've already got a creature with a brain. That's your starting point. A creature with a brain, with fingers, a typewriter with ink and paper and buttons to push that works, and that old thing on a typewriter that goes back and forth. You've already got all that stuff to start with, and the monkey starts banging at the keyboard. That should be far more easy for us to believe could occur than the world around us is simply the product of an unguided naturalistic process. But we're just conditioned not to see the silliness of it.
Dude, and I heard someone say that the fine-tuning arguments of the universe are so compelling and push back so hard on the secular narrative that secular scientists are willing to believe in an unlimited multi-universe generating machine that is unobserved, and right? Like
they would have rather embrace the theology of a Marvel movie than they would recognize the God of the Bible.
Do you care?
Multiverse theories and things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Jay, do you care if I give you the math real quick on it?
No, let's do it. It's super fascinating. I love it.
Yeah, this is the work of Douglas Axe and William Densky, and then Stephen Myers, I think, is more reporting on it. But the sequence space for a modest protein of 150 amino acids, the sequence space is 10 to the 77th. You have 10 to the 77th. Well, let's say that I was trying to think how to say it right. The chance of finding a functional sequence in a modest amino acid or a modest protein of 150 amino acids is 10 to the 77th. Okay. That's how much information you have to search through. A Planck second, I found this to be fascinating. A Planck second is the shortest measure of time there is. It's how fast light can travel the shortest measurable distance, right? Mm-hmm. In the history of the universe, there have been 10 to the 60th Planck seconds. So if we had one modest protein of 150 amino acids and we had to search through that to find one functional protein, if we had a mutation every Planck second since the beginning of the universe, we haven't had enough time to search the sequence space by a lot. 10 to the 17th is a lot, which what would be left over, right? We haven't had enough time to search for one. There are proteins that are thousands of amino acids long. There are millions of proteins. I actually saw once, and I forget what book I was reading, that, and again, these are probabilities that you're just trying to wrap your mind around the complexity of life. They said to express the diversity of life, of all life, what's the probability that would happen by chance, is 10 to the 10,380th power. Like, it's the numbers we're using are so astronomical that when someone says, yeah, but there's trillions of organisms or billions of years, you don't understand, dude. Do you know if you take 10 to the 77th and you subtract a trillion from it, you know what the answer is? 10 to the 77th. Like, it doesn't affect, right? These numbers are so huge. And it's just, that's the one thing that really, well, actually the information in DNA, I'd say, was the biggest thing for me. But understanding the massive math problem you're overcoming and just, hey, time and chance, we'll get there, is absolutely the most unsatisfying answer.
I want to point out this too. Corp says fine-tuned for death. Most of it will kill us instantly. Even most of the earth will. This is a bait and switch tactic to pull your mind away from the functional design that we see all around us into like something that causes death, and saying therefore the world isn't intelligently designed, or that it's not fine-tuned.
Yeah.
And it's just not true. I mean, just because if I fall into a volcano, I'll die, or if I, eject myself into space, I will die. There's things that will kill me. Does not neglect that I breathe, I exhale carbon dioxide, and trees take in carbon dioxide and produce oxygen that I also need to live, which in turn produce carbon dioxide. That's a broad one, but all these intricacies of life still exist. Doesn't matter about death. This is just trying to get you off track. This has nothing to do about the actual fine-tuning that exists.
No. And the appeal to time is real, dude. The multiverse theory came about because of the 25 or so fine-tuning parameters that were discovered in the universe. Like, their values were so precise and so tight and so little variation in one way or the other that, the whole thing falls apart, that they had to lean on time and randomness, right? So more time, infinite number of universes, infinite number of chances, infinite number of times. It's
like
it's ridiculous, dude.
you recognize the mathematical problem that you just described and say, okay, there's not enough time in this universe, but if you
Yeah.
give me infinite universes, like then I can do it.
It's not verifiable, not observable, can't test it. Oh God, we've left science so long ago.
Dude, we really did. We really did. And that's one thing I appreciated about T-Jump was he recognized that string theory and the multiverse theory was bad science. But it's popular. And it's popular for a reason. It's because
Yeah.
fine-tuning is so apparent, so obvious.
It's so obvious. Yeah, go ahead.
And use that as their argument. We see this all the time with people like Stephen Meyer, the guy from the Discovery Institute that I mentioned in that PragerU video earlier. Here he is pulling that very trick in this video.
In November 2016, I attended a conference in London convened by some of the world's leading evolutionary biologists. The purpose? To address growing doubts about the modern version of Darwin's theory.
Now, he doesn't go into very great specifics in this video, but he does talk about this quite a bit in the never-ending fountain of scientific knowledge known as the Joe Rogan Experience.
And I'm also skeptical about the creative power of the mutation selection mechanism, which, as it happens, so are many leading evolutionary biologists today. I attended a conference in 2016 at convened by the Royal Society in London. The first talk at that conference was given by Gerd Müller, a prominent Austrian evolutionary biologist, and he simply enumerated the 5 major what he called explanatory deficits of neo-Darwinism.
Now, I made a Reacteria video.
By the way, Forrest here hates the Joe Rogan Experience because Joe Rogan just tolerates discussions from different worldviews.
Yeah,
like this. He lets him talk. He lets Stephen Meyer talk. By the way, I've listened to this interview twice, and I don't think Rogan really responds well to Stephen Meyer. I think he's kind of sour about some of the things that Stephen Meyer is having to say. But it's certainly not. I would certainly trust the irrefutable body of knowledge that is the Joe Rogan Experience over the irrefutable body of knowledge that is the Atheist Experience.
And I would trust Stephen Meyer over Forrest Valkai.
If we're comparing shows here, Forrest, like maybe you don't want to start
a video about this interview, and I actually wrote to Dr. Mueller, the biologist he's referring to there, who gave me permission to read his thorough response, where he explained that it isn't anything like what he said. He would never say anything like that, and also all the other things that Dr. Meyer got wrong in that whole interview. By the way, Evolution News, the misleadingly named publication that espouses intelligent design, made a whole article about my response in which they said it wasn't worth responding to.
Hey, pause it. Pause it. Okay, so first of all, he's quote mining. He's criticizing creationists for quote mining, and Forrest Valkai is quote mining here because Stephen Myers writes extensively and talks extensively about that. That 2016 conference was very important to him in his, growth and his understanding. And in that conference, Gerd Mueller did point out the 5 problems the 5 challenges of the modern neo-Darwinian theory, right? And he pointed out that our current evolutionary theory largely avoids the question of how complex organizations of organismal structure, physiology, development, or behavior actually arise in evolution. The origin of anatomical novelty, he said it provides no adequate means. Non-gradual modes of transition, he says that there's a lack of explanation for non-gradual modes, referring to like the abrupt appearance and disappearance of major groups. He talks about how organisms can produce different phenotypes in response to environmental influences, and how current theory is insufficient in accounting for that. And then also just the general current theory doesn't have what he calls adequate causal explanation for all forms of phenotypic complexity. That's what he pointed out. Now, Dr. Myers takes that and runs with it in the intelligent design direction, which is not what Gerd Mueller meant. Gerd Mueller has his own theory that he calls extended evolutionary synthesis, and that's the direction he wants to take it. So the problem that he has with Myers is where Myers takes it into intelligent design. But make no mistake, at this I've read about this convention. Like the problem was current theory just doesn't account for everything that we see here. And I love this because if you read what's on the screen, it says Myers is quite careful not to misquote me. But of course, he doesn't use my criticism of the standard theory in the sense of which it was intended. So Gerd Mueller did not say that Stephen Myers got it all wrong. He doesn't. Gerd Mueller's not an intelligent design guy. He's a staunch evolutionist. But he does think that the current theory, which Forrest would subscribe to, has massive problems. And that is not quote mining. Dr. Myers has written and spoken about this so much. Like Forrest is quote mining right now.
Yeah. And by the way, I just want to point out too, I'm going to assume that some of the folks watching don't know the difference between what's often referred to as creationism, where we hold to a literal 6-day creation of Genesis that Aaron and I do agree with. We believe there's evidence for it in the observable world around us, but also that is not the same thing as intelligent design, which is a scientific theory that Stephen Meyer would articulate that science necessitates, or that the evidence that we have in science points to or necessitates an intelligent mind. So they're not the same thing. They have overlap, but it's not necessarily the same thing.
But I love intelligent design. I just view it within the young earth creationist worldview, right? Like the information in the DNA, the complexity of life, all that stuff, to me is evidence against the old earth.
He'll say, Stephen Meyer will say that intelligent design doesn't take a position like on Genesis. But what their forte, like you were highlighting, the mathematical problem of naturalistic evolution, that's what intelligent design is really great at. That's what their expertise.
But this is all pretty esoteric. A much more common quote offered by the creationism crowd is this one from Charles Darwin himself. To suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest possible degree. Now, obviously, I can't go email Darwin about this one, but I do have a strategy that I like to employ and teach whenever these things come up. Whenever somebody quotes a famous biologist to you saying that evolution isn't real, you're going to find the original source of that quote. In this case, it's from Darwin's seminal text on the origin of species. And then you're going to read the next sentence. In this case...
So one thing I want to point out here is that maybe I was speaking. He doesn't have a quote of somebody using this, does he?
No. He just says this is what people say.
It's interesting that he would throw out a clip of Stephen Meyer quoting Gerd Mueller and criticize him, and then he would show this one, which I agree is, as you'll see in the context, would be a pretty bad misquote of Charles Darwin, but doesn't have a clip of anyone actually using it. Because I feel like if there was, Forrest would have 100% incorporated it in here.
Yeah.
No, I'm sure some people out there use it in this way, but
I have no doubt that people have said that to him. I have no doubt.
But not someone. It doesn't appear to me that someone as serious as like Stephen Meyer or John Lennox would use it.
Case, we get this rather lengthy paragraph, which I'll spare you from hearing me read today. You can see plenty of videos of online of me reading this paragraph. But it says, in summary, it's supposed that the eye evolved seems absurd in the highest possible degree, yet reason tells me that if I can find all the evidence that I do in fact find in nature, then the difficulty of believing that a perfect and complex eye could have been formed by natural selection, though insuperable by our imagination, can hardly be considered real.
I'd stop there.
He did not say...
You know what he did not say? He did not say all of the evidence that we do find in nature for the development of the eye, because I can tell you right now that there isn't one. There is no evidence for the slow progression of the evolution of the eye. In fact, what it is more storytelling. They see these different organisms, worms and sea urchins and clams and scallops, and they do have light sensitive patches where, like, it's not an eye, but if there's light over here, that's how they navigate, like towards the light. They take that from what they see now, because keep in mind, that wouldn't survive their 550 million years of evolution. right? And then they extrapolate back and they say, well, see, here it is. This is how the eye would have started. Let's tell the story. This is how the eye would have started. It would have started as a simple light sensitive patch. And then through evolutionary progression, all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, slowly and eventually we would come to complex eyes. It's a logical sequence. It is not an observed sequence. In fact, what we observe is 550 million years ago, the eye appeared fully formed. Well, obviously you don't have like the eye, you don't have the soft tissue, but you've got a fossil record back into the Cambrian showing complex eyes already. So we don't actually see an earlier stage in the fossil record. We don't see an earlier stage in the world. What we see is something today that resembles what we can imagine as an early eye, and then we make a story about it. I'm telling you, dude, evolution, golly, boy, it's a story. It's a good story too, though. I mean, he's got us talking about it for 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Yeah. Y'all, I know this shit sounds crazy. He said...
It is crazy for us. Let's just be clear about that.
I understand this might sound crazy at first, but when you take all the evidence in, I can't take you seriously if you're going to tell me you don't believe it.
But just
another
real quick,
one
I just want to point out, because I'm so anti-Forrest, just the dishonesty. Like he added that all the evidence we see that we do have, which is the point is we don't have the evidence. And I doubt any serious scientist would say they would say we can see how it would work. But the claims he made are misrepresentation is the most charitable way I can say it. Downright being dishonest is probably more accurate.
Yeah.
From time to time. In fact, this one's probably my favorite. Comes from the famous biologist Stephen Jay Gould, who says, the fossil record includes no transitional forms. Yikes. That's pretty damning. It's so damning, in fact, that we actually have to read the sentence before and after this one. In this case, it comes from a paper that Gould wrote back in 1981, and the whole thing is, it is infuriating to be quoted again and again by creationists, whether by design or stupidity, I don't know, as saying that the fossil record includes no transitional forms. Transitional forms are generally lacking at the species level, but they are abundant between larger groups.
Okay,
you
pause it real
know
quick.
you gotta be desperate.
I know we gotta get this done, so I just want to say it would be a misrepresentation for someone to say there are no. Let me back up. From Stephen Jay Gould's worldview, it would be a misrepresentation for someone to speak from his worldview and say Stephen Jay Gould thinks there's no evidence for transitional fossils. I would say there isn't. Dr. Gould would say there is. So if someone said Dr. Gould said this, that would be a misrepresentation. But Dr. Gould came up with, him and another guy, came up with punctuated equilibrium. Niles Eldredge came up with the idea of punctuated equilibrium because, and this is a quote from him, we do not assert that all evolutionary change occurs in rapid bursts. We do claim that the standard expectation of slow and continuous transformation of lineages is false, that it does not accord with the evidence of the fossil record. Now, he thinks the transitional forms happen higher up the taxonomic food chain, right? So what he's saying is you don't see slow gradual progression in species. We see the transitional forms up higher, of which those are all in dispute, whatever. But he's saying you don't see slow gradual change like we expect to see if evolution were true. So let's not get it twisted. Punctuated equilibrium is his rescuing device for that.
So he's saying that the transitions happened so long ago that we wouldn't expect to find them. Like that's the way he reconciles the lack of the fossil record. Am I understanding that correctly?
No, not that it happened so long ago. He thinks that there's plenty of fossil evidence. He thinks that instead of happening at the species level, the evidence for it is happening we have good evidence at the, I don't know, genus level or whatever it is. I don't know the levels
Genus,
off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Yeah. But which maybe it's even higher, familia, whatever it is at the higher levels. Like, land mammals to whales kind of thing. Like he sees those transitional fossils, and he finds those Archaeopteryx, that kind of thing, right? Where you're seeing it higher up the food chain. But as far as like higher up I can't think of the right word. But at the species level, where we would expect to see slow, gradual changes, right? That's where it's happening at the bottom level. And those slow, gradual changes at the species level lead to the new, body plan that would take you up to the top level, right? Those changes, we don't see that. There's no evidence for that. And so what they suggested is just that what he said was in the fossil record, it seems like animals appear, they're stable for a long time, then they disappear. Then new animals appear, then they're stable for a long time, then they disappear. That's what punctuated equilibrium. He still believes in,
I gotcha.
right? He still believes in evolution, but he's saying it's definitely not slow, gradual change. That is not what the fossil record shows.
Hey guys, I just want to call out. Aaron's got a new channel. Go check it out. It's called Presup Ninja. Like, subscribe, and follow because he's going to be posting even more unique content that you're not going to find on these streams or on my Conversations with Christians channel. It's brand new. It's definitely worth the follow. I appreciate you guys hanging out with us as we're getting into the latter part of this video. But it's a brand new channel on YouTube, and he needs to bump those subscribers up. So head over to Presup Ninja on YouTube and check it out.
Did you lose me there for a second?
Yep, your camera's black.
Interesting.
Oh, did your camera die?
I don't think so. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. Yeah.
Give me 1 second.
Yeah. Guys, this is if you've been with us for the beginning, that's you've been with us for a while now, almost 2.5 hours. But if you got any questions or things you want to see us talk about, send us an email at conversationswithchristians@gmail.com. conversationswithchristians@gmail.com. We've seen some comments on this stream and others about doing kind of an open mic where we might bring up atheists, and I think we will do that in the near future. That's something that we do want to do. We've we've only done a handful of streams like this so far. We're still kind of getting our feet wet and getting the grasp on Restream and how all that works. But yeah, we will definitely plan to do that.
Okay.
All right, let's go.
Yeah, thank you for that shout out.
When you hear someone say, I'm so sick of people saying I said something stupid, and you say, he literally just said the word something stupid, you guys. But just correcting quotes isn't enough. Remember, we're deviating from dogma and dualism. What creationists don't understand is that we don't worship.
No, you're not. You're still dogmatic. Like we already talked about that. You've got plenty of dogmatic beliefs, Forrest.
You are as dogmatic as you can be.
When someone's mind has been chained by dogma, it can be very difficult for them to understand this part of science because they look to one book for all the answers. They assume that we do too. Because they look to one creator who made everything. They think that if they can tear down some big biologist, the rest.
I mean, that's right. Let's correct the record on that. The Bible is God's revelation, but everything that God has for us to know, especially in the realm of science, is not found in the Bible.
Right.
It's not found. The Bible is foundational, but it's not the all-encompassing book of knowledge that contains everything we need pertaining to God and our relationship to Him and salvation. But God has created this world and given us an intelligent mind, equipped with the ability to operate logically and to have reason and to have an ordered universe that's discoverable and discernible and understandable. And so He has set us free to learn about the world around us, and that's a core part of the Christian worldview.
Yeah. It's the scientific method is a gift for us to be able to explore the world. Forrest is abusing it. He's using the gift of God to try to slap God in the face.
Dude, but I thought about this after I watched this the first time. It's just simply another instance of where pagans worship nature. It's the same kind of package here where they're worshiping something about God, like the creation, like paganism worships the creation. Well, like where he's giving this speech, it's their little tagline, the Center for Inquiry, it was called. Their little tagline is like reason and maybe logic or something and,
Yeah,
and
so
humanism.
yeah.
But logic is is a part of God's nature, and so it's no different than worshiping creation, which is a product of God, of something that He created. As so is logic and reason an extension of God's nature, and so it's just worshiping an attribute or a product instead of the Creator.
Right. Exactly. They exchanged the creator for the created thing. It's, if anything, Forrest is proof or evidence that Romans is true. Romans 1 is true.
Uh-huh.
But you can continue on.
Check this out. This makes me laugh. I think some people I think some people joined this stream expecting us to be fangirling over Forrest, and instead they got the opposite.
Yes.
Thanks for stopping by, though. Whoops. All right.
The rest of biology will come crashing down along with them. I like this picture in particular because I could have just said they worship a bearded white guy. They think we do as well, So, why is it always a white guy, That's another talk for another time. If you want to teach evolution to a creationist, it's crucial that you help them understand that even if Darwin renounced the religion of evolutionism on his deathbed, which is some crap that I hear from time to time too, that wouldn't change anything because we don't believe evolution because of our faith in Darwin. And that brings us to the second part here about dualism. X equals 0 is not the same thing as Y equals 1. Creationists assume that if they can debunk some small part of evolution, then the rest of the theory will fall apart and there will only be creationism left as the only logical alternative. But even if someone could debunk evolution in its entirety, that wouldn't do a single thing to support the claims of creationism. Creationism is its own idea that needs its own claims backed up by its own evidence, and that is something that no creationist has ever provided, could ever provide, or will ever provide. Whatever you
100 super duper false, man. Big old false pancake right there by Forrest Valkai.
Yeah, like, first of all, he just literally set the rules of the game so that he can't lose, because he said they never will. They can't, they won't, and they never will.
I'll reject it if they do. Yeah,
because I'll call it pseudoscience and not real biology, right? Even though there are people with more better degrees actually doing research and actually participating in science out there. The idea that there's no creationists out there doing research and putting forth their own theories is ridiculous. Like, that's just patently false. He might not even know about them because I doubt he gives it any credence, but it's just patently false.
But we talked about the magnetic fields around, I forgot if it was around Venus or Mars.
I think it's
that earlier.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It was a further planet. It was either Neptune or Uranus. I can't remember which one.
But there
was a gentleman that predicted. He was a creationist, and using a 6,000-year model, he predicted what the magnetic field, the strength of the magnetic field would be. Uranus, Neptune. I think it was Neptune. So I think we already knew Uranus, and then he predicted Neptune, and then when the space probe went by it, he was spot on. And he used a 6,000.
He had actually died, and it was after his death. It was like 10 years later. His prediction was correct. So this is Forrest's pre-commitment to his worldview just showing through here, and that's what we got to call. Somebody says you're not saying it the right way.
I know. I'm trying to. I know. You're not going to get me to say it. It's Uranus.
But Forrest ignores. I mean, that, like, he, as much time as Forrest has spent, like, he wants us to think that he has studying these topics, you think he'd be aware of this experiment and this prediction that was made and vindicated. But just like the guy we were talking about in the very beginning, and the resurrection of Jesus being valid evidence for the supernatural, he rejects that as evidence for the super. So he will reject anything. Forrest has already made it up in his own mind. He's just going to reject it all.
Real quick, Ravioli Boy. I tried to do a podcast with another gentleman and it didn't work out, but we were filming a podcast one time and this was brought up, and I said to him, he said, creationists haven't made any predictions. And I said, yeah, creationists creationists predicted the magnetic field of Uranus. And it shut the podcast down for like 15 minutes, dude. Like we were just crying, laughing. I was like, because I was all like, they used it to predict the magnetic field of Uranus. So now I'm careful. Now I'm careful to say Uranus.
If only to not derail.
Yeah, I was so passionate.
All right, here we go.
Whatever you do not let them trap you into a strict dichotomy that either evolution or creation is completely and wholly true, because it's never just creation. It is their specific creation myth featuring their specific creator from their specific interpretation of their specific translation of their specific version of their specific holy book, none of which comes with any evidence of its own.
I just want to point this out. This is just more examples of Forrest gassing with his fast talk and his whole thing. And I understand his critique of religion, specifically Christianity, with its different denominations. I actually think denominations show the truth of the Bible. And maybe one day in a podcast, we can lay that out, not right now. But his theology is just terrible. This dude doesn't know anything about the Bible. I know when he's on the Atheist Experience, he's got his Bible out and has all these note cards in it and highlights, and it looks like he's understanding it. But I've heard him say just some of the most incorrect, fallacious things. And that breakdown right there, if you're talking about creationism, which comes from the Bible, translations of the Bible are irrelevant because using particular vocabulary or phrasing something in a particular way makes it more understandable for one person over another is not a knock on Christianity. That's like saying if I translated the Constitution into Chinese, it's a completely different legal system. No, right? We're all using the same Bible.
Dude, and he was criticizing people for conflating like evolution and abiogenesis. We should have had a counter of how many times Forrest conflates creationism with intelligent design.
Yeah, that's true.
He does it constantly. Like he'll pop in, he'll mix in Stephen Meyer with answers to Genesis and things like that. Bro, be consistent with your own standards here. Like be precise.
Yeah.
Like you want people to be precise with language, then be precise with your language. But I don't think Forrest really cares. I don't think he really wants to educate people like he's talking about. He's an activist. He's an evangelist for his worldview, and he does it well.
Mock.
Yeah.
It's always an anti-logic trap.
Then we
as
can
we've already
safely
established,
say
there's no
in an
such
age
thing
of
as logic in atheist worldview.
Yep.
Scientific enlightenment, that there's nothing more scientific or scripturally correct than in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Are we using the same definition of enlightenment? Are we using the same definition of scientific? Are you high?
Pause real quick. No, we're not using the same definition of science because you're using a broken, secular, atheist version of science that can't ground any of the necessary preconditions to be able to even do science. So, no, we're not using the same science. We're using the tools God gave us in light of God's revelation to understand God. You're misusing it, and that's why you come up with bad conclusions and faulty assumption based on faulty assumptions, and resort to mockery and silliness instead of actually engaging creationist arguments. And if I could say that faster, I would sound like Forrest.
And with the last couple of minutes that I have, I'd like to give you one more tip about teaching evolution to creationists, and this one is a slightly more compassionate one.
All right, this is where we need to hit our atheist gong, our atheist spirit gong. before spirit, before Forrest gets into this next part. And I know you guys probably haven't seen this part of the speech yet, but you'll catch this is the spiritual part right now.
And that is to try your best to make it matter. Try to remember that this person is coming from a point of view that the entire universe was custom made by hand with them in mind. And it can be pretty scary to step out of that comfort zone out here into the void with the rest of us. A person who's used to the idea of creationism can easily equate the feelings of freedom that I get from my nihilistic and mechanistic view of life on Earth with a feeling of hopelessness and despair. And it's up to us to help them see that there is beauty and wonderful purpose to be found in the book of nature if only you take the time to just go and look for it. I love learning and thinking.
Forrest, just so everyone's clear, Forrest is cueing this music right now.
We didn't do that. We just the gong was us. That was
as the background of his wrap up here.
About the natural processes of this universe.
My pastor did this at church today, by the
awe
way.
and in reverence of them.
Dude, that's
I feel
right.
connected.
That's what churches do. Like that's when they start hitting the keyboard. You know, like
Uh-huh.
here,
Yeah.
because it feels more spiritual. And that's exactly what Forrest is doing.
To everything in the universe. When I think about stellar nucleosynthesis, creating the elements that make things like planets and water and dogs and cheese and people, I feel like I'm at a family reunion everywhere that I go when I think about evolution and ecology and how all of life is related and interconnected. And I feel like I'm so much bigger than I really am when I think about the unbroken chain of matter and life going back millions and billions of years and all leading up to me. And I feel like I'm so much smaller than I really am when I think about the unfathomable vastness of the cosmos all around me. And I feel like I'm the least important person in the universe when I think about how small and short and insignificant my existence on this planet really is. And yet I feel like I'm the most important person in the universe when I think about the billions of microorganisms that live on and in my body that depend on me for survival. And I feel motivated and energized when I think about how my life is draining away at every moment, and eventually I will die and there's nothing else and there's so much more that I want to do. And yet I feel so at peace when I think about the biogeochemical cycles that move the carbon, the nitrogen, the oxygen, the phosphorus, the water, and every other bit of every single living thing through every ecosystem across the entire planet, and that the atoms in my body are just borrowed from them, and that those cycles will continue long after I'm gone, and I will return to those things to be used by other organisms for eons to come. And I feel that I'm completely without purpose when I think about the timeline of evolution, all those species coming and going in the blink of an eye, and my own species just 200,000 years old. And yet I feel so full of purpose when I realize that by my very existence, I am a shaper of the story of humankind. My community relies on me exactly the way that I rely on them, and whether I want to be or not, I am a significant piece of the history of my species. When I think about science, the smallest things feel huge and the biggest things feel
so
tiny.
bad.
I feel so incredibly happy and sad and powerful and weak and elated and listless and emotional and overwhelmed and everything all at once, all the time. And the sum total of all of those feelings is just flippin' radical, dude. Every single child is born with the capacity for the kind of wonder that science provides, and a scientist is just a child that survived. And maybe, if I can pass on just a little bit of that excitement to a creationist, maybe it'll get through to them in a meaningful way. For every person out there, like the charlatans that I make videos about, there are a ton more people who are thinking the same things as them, but they don't know why. They don't understand science. They've never been allowed to learn the science. They don't know what science is or where it comes from. All they need is for someone to give them an out, to show them the truth in a way that isn't scary and isn't judgmental and doesn't leave them feeling abandoned. So to recap, if you want to help reach those people, if you want to teach a creationist about evolution, try these useful strategies. Correct common misconceptions, signal to other sciences, deviate from data and dogma and dualism, and make it matter. And when you put all those together, you get a super easy to remember acronym, KZM, which I want to stress is not a word, but it sounds like it could be, and that's what's important.
Oh, Lord.
Teaching evolution to creationists is an uphill battle that's been raging for hundreds of years. You're not going to win it overnight. But if you can win over just one person, you will be freeing that person from the shackles of dogmatic thinking. and you'll be protecting the future from a population that would burn the world around them out of ignorance and fear. And that is a very worthy endeavor. And with that,
Which is
I'm Forrest Valkai. Thank you so much for enjoying my talk.
crazy.
Thanks so much
We
for
can
joining the rest
pause
of this
it.
conference. Have an
Crazy just to think of his abject ignorance in relationship to all of the great Christians' minds that laid the foundation for the science that he's doing today. The great thinkers, the great scientists, even today. I mean, to think that being a creationist equals being ignorant and stuck in a system that gives you comfort because you're an idiot. John Polkinghorne was the head of physics at Queen's College in Cambridge and left to become a priest. And then he later came back to Queen's College. He says there's nothing in science that precludes the existence of God. He was a staunch Christian. Now, he wasn't a creationist, but to think that Stephen Myers and Michael Behe and Douglas Axe and Jason Lyle and Kepler and Newton and Galileo and all of Descartes, all of these Thomas Aquinas, just over and over and over again, that Forrest feels superior to these people, the arrogance is mind-boggling. I can't even wrap my head around it. That's why I'm so against this type of thing. Man, I wish I could talk faster. I could hang with them.
No, arrogance is right. And again, it's like the conversation we had at the restaurant the other night with the atheist. When we were talking about those great scientific minds, he thinks they're idiots. I mean, he thinks he's got to figure out. It doesn't matter if they're in the 1st century. It doesn't matter if they're in the 15th century. He is a more sophisticated, brighter mind than they are. And he'll say like, oh yeah, they'll say things like, yeah, they contributed greatly in mathematics or something, but they just believed in Jesus because the state like forced them to believe it.
Yeah.
Which was what we heard. Like, and it's just, man, how little do you think of these other people, and how highly do you have to think of yourself to have an attitude like that?
Yeah. And you know, he should take his mind out of the clouds that he just preached about and start turning his skeptical eye to his own worldview that by his own admission can't give him the foundations for knowledge, can't account for human experience, can't account for logic or morals, can't account for his senses he's using to do the scientific, can't account for the uniformity of nature or induction. The scientific method has no meaning in his worldview. He needs to start thinking about that stuff because he is philosophically bankrupt. And I'm sorry, dude, if you are someone who doesn't understand that science is grounded in philosophy and theology, you're just not getting it, because you cannot use the scientific method to test the scientific method. The scientific method is grounded in philosophy, and philosophy is grounded in theology. And ultimately, God is the triune God of the Bible, is the foundation for all of these things. And so what I would leave someone with, because we're going to sign off here after almost 3 hours of podcasting, is just understand that there is an alternate worldview that doesn't leave you in the bankrupt nonsense that he just talked about. Evolution, the theory of evolution, I'm going to use the atheist argument back on them. The theory of evolution is an unnecessary layer. You don't need it. God told us how he created the earth, how he created the universe, how he created life, how we're important, how he cares about us, how he sent his son to die for us, how he has a plan of redemption for us, how he watches us and takes care of us. He gave us the tools to explore the world in the scientific method. And you don't have to just live in stupid pragmatism where you go, I don't really know why, but it works. There's a worldview that can ground all that can not only give you peace with the world around you and give you a reason to understand it, but can give you peace with God through Jesus Christ, and ultimately save you from the condemnation that you're born into. And that's really what matters. Because I can tell you this, dude, one day Forrest will die, and one day Forrest won't be an atheist. And I'm not saying he's going to go to heaven or hell. Only God knows, and Forrest's life isn't over. But I can tell you this, after Forrest dies, if he were to come back and you were to ask him, he would say, Jesus Christ is Lord, and you better get right with him. You know?
Yep. Amen.
And that's
why we do it,
the
man.
important thing.
That's why we spend time doing this. It's not just for
Mhm.
contention. It's not just for debate for the sake of debate,
No.
but because we believe the Christian worldview is true. And so we live that out accordingly. But we've got more people coming into the chat, guys. We have got to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Because we're pushing up on 3. There are some people that have been with us through this entire stream tonight. So
Yeah.
American M, I know you've been critiquing us, but man, I appreciate you hanging out with us and providing feedback and things like that in the comments. But we're gonna wrap it up, guys.
Yeah.
Hey, this is my name's Tim. This is Aaron, the Presup Ninja. Go check out his channel called Presup Ninja. Watch out for more content there, and then we will be back with another show, and we'll do an open mic soon. We will do something like that soon. We'll bring some people up and actually have some conversations. And until then, we'll talk to you guys next time.